Hey everybody, it's Timothy here with a quick heads up about the episode you're about to listen to. Unfortunately, we experienced some pretty annoying audio issues with this one, so I just wanted to let everybody know up front that the sound quality is going to be less than stellar, which I'm not happy about, but there's little we can do about it at this point. For one, my voice is just not great in this episode on account of coming off the flu, and you'll probably hear right away that I wasn't exactly in tip-top shape to be recording. On top of that, our guest's recording unfortunately picked up some very distracting static throughout the entire recording. I tried my best to find a way to remove it, and I was successful at clipping out most of the static, but the result is that Danelius's voice sounds way more metallic and robotic than it should. I think the best way to approach this is just to imagine Danelius as a robot for this episode, but you can still make out what he's saying just fine. And then for whatever reason, around the halfway point, there's a buzzing noise that kicks up and turns off at random that I can't do anything about and have no idea where it came from, so it's just going to be part of the episode, unfortunately. So I'm not in love with the audio on this one, and we'll work to hammer out some of these issues for future recordings. But the insights are still pretty good here, so I fixed up as much as I can, and I hope people can still get something out of it. Apologies for the less than ideal presentation, and hope you still enjoy most of the episode. Thanks, folks. Let's get to it. Hello, friends, and welcome back to a bonus episode of the Jank Tank. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'm going to be your post-flu, gravelly-voiced host today. I have on the line with me Teld and Danelius joining us to talk Peasant Cube for Aetherdrift. If you haven't already, go ahead and check out our mainline review of the set with Chris and Teld. I believe it was episode number 38, where we talked more about the logistics of the set, high power level stuff, the types of mechanics that you can expect from Aetherdrift and things like that. Here, we're going to talk Peasant Cube and all of the wonderful commons and uncommons that we're getting, which turns out is quite a bit overall. We're going to skip all the normal intro stuff. I did want to welcome Danelius back. Thanks for joining us. You've always got some pretty high-level takes on the Peasant Cube here and a couple cards that you would talk about that we would probably never talk about. In fact, you've turned us on to a lot of stuff in the past that we probably wouldn't have landed on if it weren't for you. So welcome back, and Teld, hello to you as well.
Hey, how's it going? I do have to give Danelius credit. ANEP is a total banger. You called that very well.
Yes, it is. If you want to hear more from Danelius, you can find him in our Discord, the Jank Diver Gaming Discord. You can also find him in the Limited Level Ups Discord, where he does some modding there. Again, just to try and get into the meat and potatoes of it, we do have a semi-grading system that we've been very lax on lately. We're probably going to minimize it in the future because it does actually take some work to go through and label everything. But we'll add a couple labels here and there, things like forever cards for the cube and role players, bridge cards, stuff like that. We'll bring those up when relevant here, but we again got a little bit lazy with it. And I do want to apologize. I don't know if Danelius or Teld can kind of tell me what's going on, but my voice is definitely not 100%. I came down with the flu over a week ago before we recorded the last episode, and I was like, oh, surely by next Sunday I'll be 100%. But nope, there's still some sort of laryngitis thing going on there, so hopefully I'm not coming through unlistenably, but whatever. Also, happy Super Bowl day if you partake, if you're one of those people. I don't really know anything about it.
Happy Super Time Half Bowl Show Day, or Halftime Show Day.
Happy Kendrick Lamar Day or whatever it is. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you who's playing in the Super Bowl. Apparently the same people as last year is what I've been told. But all right, enough banter, enough quibbling around. Let's talk some Magic the Gathering cards, and we're gonna start off with white and blue with 4 cards each, and then we're gonna kick up things once we get into the other colors with way more to talk about. But the very first thing I wanted to do, and hopefully one of you guys can take this to kind of lead things off before we even talk about the first card. Can you guys talk to me a little bit about the Stert Yer Engins mechanic? Danelius, I know you saw some early access stuff. Maybe you can attest to how it actually plays out in Limited, but what are the expectations of Stert Yer Engines in the Peasant Cube environment before we even talk about the cards that have Stert Yer Engines, because it's going to be a recurrent thing on a lot of these?
Yeah, I think if I have to work for it at all, I'm not interested. I think it needs to be pure upside, and I would just play the card if it didn't have the Stert Yer Engine text on there, and the Stert Yer Engine text is just a bonus.
Yeah, if you'd asked me this 3 days ago, I definitely would have had a slightly different answer. I think a lot of the Stert Yer Engine cards are statted just very slightly below where you'd be happy in, especially in like a cube environment for the best of these cards. And then with Stert Yer Engines at max speed, they become like really, really good. And I'm interested in like a package of these cards. I am now kind of seeing it more as a package as opposed to you kind of need to want the card anyways. There's like 7 or so of these Stert Yer Engine cards that I'm interested in kind of playing as a module, testing it out, seeing how it feels. I think that the second Stert Yer Engines card that you play is going to be a lot better than the first one. And so, yes, I agree with what Teld was saying in general. That's where I was 3 days ago. I feel a little bit different now. I think that it's pretty easy to get max speed to 4 on these cards. It just takes a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. And I do think ultimately 2 or 3 Stert Yer Engines cards is going to play better in a deck than just 1. And so I'm interested in them as a package more than I was a few days ago.
Okay, I don't know if this applies to you because your cube rotates, but is there any concern if that's the way that they play that these end up being, I don't want to say parasitic because like they're not really, but does it feel like you're kind of handcuffed where if you ever want to cut one of the Stert Yer Engines cards for a different card, you feel like you're contextually weakening a number of other good cards in your cube?
100% yes, but that's where I go back to saying it's not that you can't play these cards as a single one-off card in a deck that doesn't have anything else Stert Yer Engines in it. Like I said, I think they're just slightly below what you'd be hoping to get on a card in the cube, and then with max speed at 4, which they all can do on their own, they become, I think, quite solid. Mm-hmm. The issue is that the second card you play is just so much better than the first because you're that much more likely to already have max speed. And so to answer your question, yes, I do think ultimately they're going to play better as a module, as a package than they will as individual cards, but I don't think it's like so much different that they won't play reasonably well in your cube even when they're on their own. That's what I'm hoping. I want to test it out. We'll see.
I'm also going to go with the assumption that these cards, we're just going to probably think they're generically better if they are Mardu as opposed to
Absolutely.
Blue or green.
Right? I'm only interested in the Mardu stuff, and I think that's in part because the only playable gold cards with Stert Yer Engines, I mean, the only ones that have Stert Yer Engines on them are gold cards. And I think both of them are kind of along the same lines. They're like just slightly missing what I'd hope to see out of gold cards in cube, but once they have max speed, they're both very good.
Yeah, I think there are only 2 green cards in the entire set that have max speed or Stert Yer Engines on them anyway, and they're not like excellent cards, so it's not meant to be a green mechanic, and the blue designs are just baffling.
I didn't realize they were only on 2 green cards. I thought they were on more.
Yeah, it really is a Mardu Spectrum thing. That's where all the 1-drops with Stert Yer Engines are and stuff like that. So, okay, so those are some interesting thoughts. We'll talk about it more in depth when we talk about some of the individual cards, which our very first card of the set is going to be Nesting Bot, which is a single white mana for a 1/1. It's a robot at uncommon, artifact creature. It has Stert Yer Engines, so if you have no speed and a Stert Yer Engines permanent enters the battlefield, you go to 1 speed, and you can gain 1 speed per turn by making your opponent lose a life during your own turn. Nesting Bot says when it dies, create a 1/1 servo artifact creature token, and at max speed, this creature gets +1/+0. So, Doom Traveler, right? Except it doesn't make a flying token when it dies, but it obviously has the bonus of getting +1/+0 with max speed and also Stert Yer Engines. Also, I guess being an artifact is the reason we're talking about this, right?
Yeah, I think that the combination of it being an artifact on both sides, which is something that we haven't seen out of the Doom Traveler, Crawling Chorus makes an artifact when it dies. So it's the fact that it's an artifact on both sides, so if you care about the typeline that's relevant, and the fact that it's a max speed card as, like, again, what I was saying before, this is the kind of card where, to me, this is just slightly below what I'd be hoping to see. Now we have Indebted Spirit, which does have some upside as the aura from MH3, but it's not that far below Indebted Spirit, and it does have, again, some upside in the fact that it's an artifact on both sides. And then it's a Stert Yer Engines card, so if you have a little module of 6 or 8 Stert Yer Engine cards, then it has additional benefit there. So if you care about both things to me, I want to run it. If you only care about the artifact part, I don't know. I don't think it's really amazing, but it's playable.
And like the max speed bonus on this kind of doesn't matter, right?
Agreed.
Yeah, so since we, I don't remember if we had this last review episode, and I don't think we did. We've added an artifact package that kind of, I would say it's broadly speaking in mostly blue-white, but kind of moves over into Jeskai. We're trying, after a lot of talk from Danelius, we added a card that I love from the Neocube, and so Kinzen Smelter, and this seems like the exact kind of card that you could insert this as a artifact package in your red-white deck with like Galvanic Discharge or Galvanic Blast, whichever one it is that we're going to talk about later, as well as like so Kinsman Smelter, that small artifact package, and this just kind of fuels cards like that. It makes sure that you can keep stats on cards like Metrica's Reign of Truth, and is a 1-drop that you can do if you're doing any of the animatory sort of thing. So I think this being an artifact is a pretty big upgrade over some of the previous versions of this card, especially since both parts of the card can block, unlike a card like Crawling Chorus.
So, fine little archetype card. I would assume you want to care about artifacts before you really care about this card, but like Doom Traveler is not actually an excellent card, and making a non-flyer is a downgrade, so you really do need to care about artifacts here.
Yeah, just as a question, do we think this would have been too good if it made a Thopter when it died?
No, I don't think it would have been too good. It would have just been Doom Traveler.
So a lot of folks have this as the second or third best non-rare in the set for white already. And so if it made a Thopter, that might have just been a limited retail consideration, not making a Thopter. But I agree for Cube, I don't think it would have been too good.
Okay, so the next one, speaking of bangers, it might be too good. This is our first Forever card, one of the handful. We're trying to really reserve that for just the best of the best. It's Glory Heath Lynx. So that's 1 and a white for a 2/3 cat mount with lifelink. And when it attacks while saddled, you search your library for a basic plains card, put it into your hand and shuffle, and then you saddle for 2. And man, this is just everything you want to be doing, right? It doesn't have an ETB, but as far as stat lines go, it's a big beefy stat line. It gains you life. Like it could potentially generate 2 or 3 cards worth of advantage. Just seems like a fantastic card that's probably the best in slot of this effect for the foreseeable future.
Meow.
One thing I was going to say before we started the review is that I actually really appreciate this set because I don't think there's many cards that are kind of clearly better than previous options. It's a lot of stuff that you got to really think about as a designer. Like, what are you trying to support in your environment? This is the best card in the set, and I don't think it's very close. And I think it is very clearly better than anything we've had before it. So it's an easy include. And I do think the interesting thing for people to start having to consider, because we're getting so many of these busted uncommon 2-drops now in all colors practically, but especially red and white lately, is I do think you have to have a pretty solid sense in your own head of what kind of a tier list, what the ranking is, because now we have Glyph Elemental, we have Neighborhood Guardian, and so many other incredible white 2s. Is this better than those? I don't know. I have no idea. But for me, it's better than Ambitious Farmhand, and I was playing that before, so it's easy to slot in there. But that's just something to keep in mind. As we get more and more and more of these kinds of cards, it's going to be hard for them to just be power creeping all the time on effects like Neighborhood Guardian or Glyph Elemental. So having a solid sense of like, okay, here's the general ranking of white 2s in my cube, I think it's going to be more and more important for me going forward.
Do we have a white 2 that can draw multiple cards per game?
No.
On its own, not really. No. Clarion Spirit can make multiple pieces of cardboard, but that's about the best you're doing in terms of that. This card, I think this is one of those spots too where you have to start recognizing like what does your deck need when you're trying to prioritize these 2s. But yeah, this card is it feels like it's just going to slot right in with the best of the best there.
It's also a random mount for throw from the saddle and what's that, Shepherd of the Flock or whatever.
Oh,
Shepherd
I didn't think about that. Yeah. Wow. Shepherd, that's huge. Oh man, that's what is
it called? Shepherd of the something. It buys back a mana value 3 or less, but if it's a mount, it puts it into play.
Shepherd.
Shepherd of the Clouds.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, just random mount synergy, no big deal. Danelius, you've got to talk to us about the next one because I think we're still a little angry about it.
So this is a Sundial Dawn Tyrant. This is 1 and a white for a 3/3. It's a legendary artifact creature construct. And it says, we follow as it I'm just kidding. I was going to read the text, but it has no text. It has no text at all. It is a vanilla 2-mana 3/3 in white. Now, I heard some people being upset about this, and I don't quite understand it, to be honest. To me, I saw this and I was wowed. I was kind of floored. This is just the biggest creature. The chonk here is so serious. It has to be taken seriously. The largest creature in my cube at 2 mana, naturally, I guess you could say, it's not exactly naturally, is Streetwise Negotiator. That's the 2 mana 0/2 that when it comes into play, can put a counter somewhere, including itself, and then, deals damage equal to its toughness, basically. So it's effectively a 3 mana 3/3 to just put the counter on itself, but it does have some additional upside. On the other hand, it can die in response to its ETB to a shock. So there's also some downside there. that's it in terms of 3/3s in my cube. This would be immediately, effectively, the biggest 2-drop in my cube. And I just don't think you can really look down your nose at that. I think that's pretty meaningful. I think the same thing about the retail environment, by the way. I think that this, having the largest thing at all times on 2 mana just really matters. And so if that's all it was, however, I don't think it would be good enough because it is boring. There's no synergies you can really use with it. It's just chonky. But this is an artifact. And so if you do have artifact synergies stretching out from white, I don't know how you get away from the size of this card. I'm not saying you have to play it. I was just talking about Glory Heath links and how there's a huge list of banger 2s now at this point, and especially in white. So I don't think you're forced to play this. And if this kind of makes you upset or it doesn't spark joy, don't play with it. But all I'm saying is, from a power level perspective, I would be shocked if this does not stand up in cube. It's not the best top deck, but it just rules the board on turn 2, and I think that matters a lot.
Does not spark joy.
Yeah, it doesn't spark joy. We've already expressed our frustration with this card not being a 1-mana 3/1. I don't know. This card just I'm sure it will have fine stats. I'm sure if you play it, it's good. It has artifact synergies, but whatever. I'm going to be a bit reductive here and say it gets blocked by Canyon Crab, but that's not neither here nor there.
Everything gets blocked by Canyon Crab. And I think you meant Doomblade, yeah.
It dies to Doomblade, sure.
It doesn't die to go for the throat, though.
Very true.
I mean, if I care about this, don't I just want, Mandible Justiciar, every time? If I care about this being an artifact, obviously you can put this in non-artifact decks, which you wouldn't really do with Justiciar.
Yeah, that's the point, is the artifact stuff just gets to be upside on a card that's already massive,
Yeah, I bet this plays well. I could never use a cube slot on it. I'm sorry, I just couldn't do it.
That's fair.
Just isn't happening, but yeah, I can acknowledge it's fine.
I don't need my white 2s to be stat beasts now too. Please, Wizards, please. All right, another addition here by Danelius, I believe.
Yeah, so this is Light Shield Parry. This is 1 white mana for an instant. And it says, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn and has cycling 2. Now, this is, for me, actually more boring than the last card. I'll be clear about that. I'm not bored by the last card. I am definitely a little bit bored by this card. The reason why I added it is I think it's an interesting possible kind of bridge card between aggro white decks and then decks that care about drawing cards or discarding cards. And we're going to get to a couple cards later in the review that do care about discarding cards. I think that cycling is a really interesting ability to add to a card like this because it's an effect that most of the time you're going to want to cast this spell. This is, oftentimes, and they did this a lot, they chose a lot of cards, a lot of interesting cards to add cycling to in the set. Usually in the past, they liked to add cycling to cards that had kind of really varied play patterns. So, cards that, destroy target artifact or enchantment or cycling. So it's sometimes your opponent's just not even going to have a target for this. And so the cycling's a really relevant effect. Tricks are generally speaking highly usable. And so putting cycling on it is kind of bizarre because, what's the situation where you're not going to want to use your trick? But I actually do think that there's a fair number of situations where your opponent's on a high removal deck or they're holding up their own mana and you just don't want to fire this off. I think that's a pretty common play pattern in Modern Limited. And so giving an out of cycling to this card I do think is relevant, but without the potential synergies around the blue draw 2 stuff, and then again potentially this discard stuff that we're going to get into later, I don't think this would be worth it. I probably am not going to play it anyways. I'm going to flag it as a card to be aware of, just because we've never really seen a card like this that is a really efficient trick while also having the cycling buyout. But I don't think it's particularly powerful. I'm not arguing for its inclusion. I just think it's an interesting card to earmark and one of mine.
Yeah, we just went up to 2 combat tricks in white. We're running Crumb and Get It as well as Auspicious Arrival, the +2/+2 for 2 that makes a clue out of MKM. And I just sort of feel like this is worse than both of those. I get why we're into the cycling 2 being a bridge card. And I think if you want to play it, that's fine. But just +2/+2 generically with no other upside is not something I'm super into. I mean, it does all those things you mentioned. This is a really boring card.
I have 2 things about this. First off, I don't believe Cyclone 2 is just not what it used to be. I don't think that's a huge, incredible buyout. It is a buyout. It does give you something to do with a card that would otherwise be dead or not right for the matchup. But Cyclone 2 is not good. I just don't believe that's good and hasn't been for a while. And also for a lot of these cards, like we're going to talk about the Honey Mammoth later, we're going to talk about the Switcheroo. I would want the effect to be something that I was already interested in before I care about the fact that you're tacking Cyclone onto it, which is a little different for like big chunky creatures. Like you could sell me on the Honey Mammoth or the Ravenous Lindworm, whatever we're calling it. But for something like this, I don't ever want to put a card in my deck that just says give target creature +2/+2 for 1 mana, or rather in my cube. So like tacking Cyclone onto it makes the card more playable, but doesn't make me more interested in the base effect that I wasn't interested in the first place. So, like, the card probably plays fine. Obviously, if you can find a spot to fire off +2/+2 and win a combat, that's good enough. But I think there are better combat tricks for doing that. You don't really need the Cyclone on an effect like this. So, I'm not interested, though obviously, like, take bad effect, put Cyclone on it, and suddenly it's like a more playable card. But I do want to walk back a little bit that like Cyclone 2 is like some sort of actual good buyout. I don't think it's a good buyout. I think it's a fine buyout.
Yeah, that's it. First of all, I agree with everything both of you just said. Again, I want to be fair. I'm not arguing for the card's inclusion at the moment. I just think it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. But
sure,
I'm not sure how I feel. I thought a lot about what you were just talking about, Tim, in terms of Cyclone 2. Is that a playable thing in Modern Limited? I would not have said. I don't think that it is, unless you're synergizing with it. That to me is the key. And given the fact that currently the best way to play blue in my cube is to draw 2 cards in a turn, that makes me a lot more interested in Cyclone 2 than I would have been otherwise. And the question for me becomes, okay, how many, as we add more payoffs, like, Mindless Conscription, or in this set, potentially a couple of these discard payoffs, could that start to make this effect more reasonable? In a vacuum, I don't want Cyclone 2. If you're synergizing around it, I think it's interesting.
That's fair. That's why, like, Cyclone 2 on giant creatures, like the demon we're going to talk about, is just, like, way more appealing, because then you're talking about synergizing with reanimation and stuff like that. So, okay, well, that does it for white. I'm going to take the first blue card. First one is Diversion Unit. 1 in a blue for a 2/1. It's an artifact creature robot on uncommon. It has flying, and you can pay blue and sacrifice this creature to counter target instant or sorcery unless its controller pays 3. Now, Danielius, you actually have a note here that you really don't like the 2-mana 2/1 flyers, and I'm interested in you elaborating on that. I found that is actually kind of like the baseline stats that we get on 2-mana flyers these days. There used to be a point where I looked at that stat line and I was like, oh, this is pushed, like a 2-power flyer for 2 mana, but it seems like we just get tons of those these days, like every set kind of has one, to the point where it's like the new Windrake, right? I think this is a decent card if you care about pushing artifacts. It's a little bit weird. It's kind of like a blue version of like your Thrashing Bronodon or whatever, where it's like, do I really want to sacrifice my 2-power evasive thing to counter a spell if I'm given the opportunity? But obviously, like, it's a little bit skill testing for the person playing it, like whether you want to do that or not. So I think this is a nice little package if you care about artifacts. If you don't, it's just kind of like a dorky flyer, and you would get a bunch of these days. But I did want to note mostly that like 2-mana 2/1 flyer is very common these days. It is something that we should probably expect at least one of in each new set moving forward.
Yeah, really what I'm trying to get at is, I do hate the stat line. I want to be clear. And really what I'm saying is that I hate the stat block 2/1 in general. Whether that's, you guys have talked before about how 1-mana 2/1s for you aren't what they used to be, and I definitely agree with that. I'm more a fan, honestly, of 1-mana 2/1s than I think y'all are, because I think you just kind of do have to get your game started on turn 1, and I'm happy enough to play a 2/1 if it has some good upside. But that's if it costs 1 mana. The 2/1 stat block on a 2-mana creature, I think, is like a really tough sell, and the text box has to be incredible. And flying alone does not do close to enough for me to make that 2/1 stat block on a 2-mana creature worth it. I put some comps in the doc. Zephyr Sentinel and Plume Creed Escort are 2/1s that I do play, 2/1s with flying that I do play, but really critically they have flash, and I think that's one of the ways to mitigate the awful stat line of 2/1 on a 2-mana cost creature, because the plan isn't to just play this to the board on turn 2, or play those cards to the board on turn 2. It's to hold up stuff on turn 2, and okay, if there's nothing else to do, or if my opponent goes for their interactive spell, then I'll play this, poorly statted creature that has some other really relevant effect. Mm-hmm. Now, stuff like Storm Chaser Drake or Battlewing Mystic, these are sorcery speed 2/1 flyers that also have other upsides. These used to be in my queue, and we just found them to be awful, and we took them out because playing at a 2/1 to the board on turn 2 is just not something that we found to be a very effective game plan. Now, Diversion Unit might be a little different because it does have this I guess, this good ability, but like you're saying, it's like, how often do you really want to be sacrificing your 2 mana or more creature for interaction? You'll do it if it's a super impactful play, and maybe just the presence of it in play will force your opponent to play differently. That's certainly plausible, but I need a lot out of my sorcery speed 2/1 stat block 2 mana creatures these days, and I don't think this does it for me. The one caveat is that it's an artifact, and blue in my cube, kind of shockingly, actually has by far the least artifacts, because blue in general doesn't get to do object creation like other colors get to do. So it doesn't get the tokens that other colors get. Just the fact that it's an artifact means that I'm a little bit more interested than I otherwise would be. If it makes it my cube, it's 100% for that reason.
Is this, I mean, in your cube environment, I don't know if this card's still legal, but is this better than something like Malcator's Watcher, the 1/1 Vigilance Flyer that dies into draw a card?
Yeah, probably. Watcher did not last long in the cube. I've tried a number of like 2-drop artifacts creatures just because they're artifacts, and none of them have survived. Maybe the version unit will be different. You know, it wears the Zoetic Glyph pretty well. That's the nice thing to say about it. But yeah, the stat block is a tough sell without a really huge text box.
It's the one toughness. Like,
yes.
If these were 1/2s, would you like them more, or
probably not.
that just not aggressive enough at that point? Like, we want them to be 2/2s, right? Like, what we want is 2/2s for 2, but we just, like, we got our first one in Foundations as, like, a throwaway card that wasn't even in the main set, right? The Dawnwing thing. So, I don't know how often we're going to get 2 mana 2/2 flyer.
My attitude is, I need it to either be a 2/2, I need it to have card advantage or object advantage when it comes into play, or I need it to have flash. That's kind of my current thinking, but maybe the fact that this is an artifact and blue is so starved for artifacts pushes this over the top. I mean, that's my summary.
Which daily PSA to draft Arch, what is it, Atsukin Archer, because it just eats these cards for breakfast. It just absolutely destroys cards like this.
Atsukin Archer, consistently the most underrated card in the cube, probably.
Yeah, I by the way, I love the art on this Scrounge and Skyray. Like, this feels like a classic Magic art to me.
Yeah, this is one of the good arts in the set, for sure. So this is Scrounging Skyray. I'm glad you told me it was Skyray, because I was about to say Stingray. It's a 1 in a blue for a fish pirate 1/2 flyer. And when you discard 1 or more cards, put that many +1/+1 counters on this card. It has cycling 2. I'm kind of digging this card. I don't know if this is the kind of card that's going to work in our Peasant Cube, but I see this and get really excited about this sort of thing. I mean, I think if you put 1 counter on this thing and we're kind of cooking, right? We're at a 2/3 for 2 with flying. And if you get 2 counters on it, which is pretty easy to do with something like Faithful Saluting or the Modern Age over a couple of turns, you're really overrate on your tempo flyer there. And then, like, one of your thoughts would be, this is a bad top deck, but I don't remember if I mentioned it has cycling 2. And so if you draw it late into the game when you've used a lot of your resources and a 1/2 flyer is not that good, you do have that buyout, which I think is better on these kind of cards. In one, it enables this sort of archetype to work. And then also, these kind of cards are much better opening hand cards where you have all of your resources available, and much worse top decks when you've kind of expended all of your discard effects.
Yeah, and we should probably just bring up the Maraudin Mako at the same exact time. I know it's in a different color, but there's also a red 1/1 with Cycling 2, and it also gets a +1/+1 counter whenever you discard 1 or more cards for each card you discard. So it's the same exact effect on a 1 mana 1/1 instead of a 2 mana 1/2 flyer. So that's kind of like a package we should just talk about at the same time here.
Yeah, I'm curious what you guys think about the card Fairy Vandal. So that's the 2 mana for a 1/2 with flying. Whenever you draw, well, actually probably read it because I'm not forgetting what it does. But I think it's whenever you draw your second card each turn, you put a counter on this.
Yes.
I think.
We used to play it in the early days of the Peasant Cube, and I do think it is a strong enough card. I think it actually, like, you just get it up to a 2/3 flyer, which is fairly easy to do. That's good enough. Like, 2 mana 2/3 flyer is good. Sometimes you can do that at instant speed, but you're usually talking during your own turn. I can tell you, Chris even, like, brings this card up, like, every other month to try out in the mainline cube. Like, he just really likes the card. I do think it's good enough. It doesn't have a lot of... Well, I would say it doesn't have a lot of synergy, but there's a lot more of this draw 2 package going on now that, like, I do actually think Fairy Vandal would be a strong card. Probably not worth a cube slot in my eyes, because there's just a lot of really good 2s in blue these days. So it'd be hard for me to make a cut for it, but I do think it is a good enough card. I wouldn't be embarrassed to see it in a back.
I was going to say one of the things that I like about this card is, especially if we're doing cycling or any sort of instant speed discards, Fairy Vandal can sometimes be a little awkward in that you usually have to trigger it on your own turn because it's a lot harder to draw 2 cards on your opponent's turn than it is to draw 1 extra card on your turn. And I kind of like that this one works with any of the discards. I think they're probably both relatively similar, but also, again, having cycling on this, I think, is a pretty meaningful upside on cards that are notably much worse when you're in an attrition game state where you've ran out of cards.
Yeah, this is probably maybe the most exciting card or package of cards in the cube to me is Skyray and Mako. I went on a small roller coaster with them, and that when I originally saw them, all I saw was Fairy Vandal and a Johnny's Primate, these are cards that I don't really like very much, because in my mind, if you're going to put a payoff in your deck, it just so easily folds to a single Doomblade or whatever, and it's like, well, I built my whole deck around this card, and now it's just dead. That's a real feel bad to me. So I don't really think you should see Skyray as a payoff. It's more of a support card. It's more of a, generic filler card. And my concern is, like, from that perspective, does it end up only going into kind of one deck, which is the blue draw 2 space that we've been talking about? And if it's only going into that one deck, and it's basically just like a support card in that deck, is that good enough for a cube slot? That's my concern for the card. My hope is that, you can build a blue-red draw discard deck where the headliners of the deck are Skyray and Mako. My hope is that they're so interesting and powerful because you get a counter for each card discarded, which does make it a lot different than Vandal. That maybe we even consider cards like Fatal Saluting again. Like I haven't considered that card in a long time because the synergies in my mind just haven't been there to run it. But hey, if I'm putting 4 counters on these cards with Fatal Saluting, like suddenly that becomes an interesting proposition. So I'm very intrigued by these cards. I think it's possible that they end up being mostly support cards in kind of a blue draw 2 space, and that's kind of all they are. And if that's the case, I doubt that they'll stick around for long in the cube just because these slots are now so coveted. But I'm very intrigued to test this stuff out.
Yeah, I was just looking through our Peasant Cube to see like what type of cards exist that would trigger this that wouldn't also just trigger Fairy Vandal. And there's not a lot, so like the cards are probably very comparable. There is stuff like we're on Mirror Shell Crab right now, which is kind of cool, like channel, counter your spell, get a +1/+1 counter. But obviously, like, this also has Cyclone. I like that the Cyclone deck cards also have Cyclone. It just makes it, like, a really tight-knit theme. I think somebody also added, like, the Red Pinger later on, which fits into this category of cards. It's not as, like, blatantly powerful as the Mako or the Skyray, but, yeah, I do like tacking Cyclone onto the Cyclone payoffs, and I'm sure if you, like, really want to build around it, there's some sort of, like, turbo discard thing you can do that makes these cards, like, actively busted in a way that, like, Fairy Vandal can't, do because it's capped at once per turn. So I like what this is advertising. I don't really know where it fits in, like, the broader, puzzle right now, but this sort of effect, I would love to see more of it, honestly, like something that's not necessarily just, like, blue-red spells and can actually get out of hand and has, like, incentive to, like, play cards that you might otherwise not play, like Faithless Looted and stuff like that. So very, very cool what this is advertising. Also Fish Pirate.
Notably, the LTR Land Cyclers trigger these, which I think is pretty meaningful. I mean, obviously you're not going to have infinite of those, but they are very good cards that will just trigger this, which doesn't work for Fairy Vandal.
Yep. What do we have next with Roadside Blowout? Poop joke.
Yeah, poop joke. Roadside Blowout is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. It's an uncommon. This spell costs 2 less to cast if it targets a permanent with mana value 1. And then it says return target creature or vehicle an opponent controls to its owner's hand. Draw a card. I think this card is nuts. This card is extremely, extremely good. I've argued for it being extremely good actually in the retail environment too, but it's way better in Cube. It's like significantly better in Cube, I think. So obviously some comps for this would be stuff like Repulse, which is 2 and a blue for an instant that returns a creature to its owner's hand. The OG or one of the OGs was Arrester's Admonition, which was a sorcery basically that returned a creature and drew a card, or you could cast it at instant speed to not draw a card. I think that all of those are kind of the wrong way to think about this. I think the closer comp is actually Repeal, in the sense that I'm seeing this card as primarily a 1-mana card that's going to target 1-mana cards. That's the main reason I have it in the deck. That's the main reason I want to play it in the cube. I want to play it alongside stuff like Emrakul's Messenger and Mischievous Mystic and Mindless Conscription. The point being, I want this to just be a 1-mana cantrip. And then some percentage of the time, maybe even 50% of the time, maybe more, yeah, I'm spending 3 mana on it to target something larger. But it's not like that's a terrible buyout if they have a 4-drop or a 3-drop in play, spending 3 mana to bounce it. The real problem with these sorcery speed versions of this effect in Cube is that what happens when the card you need to target is cheaper. And yes, this is still lining up poorly against 2-drops. That's definitely a bummer. And in some Cube environments that just don't play many 1s or any 1s at all, this is going to be awful. But in my Cube, I play a lot of 1s, and this card seems like the exact sort of thing that blue can make use of really well, especially, again, alongside all of the plethora of payoffs that it has for playing 1-mana cantrips. So I think it's really, really good. I would be almost so bold as to throw a forever label on this for my personal Cube, because I can't imagine this ever coming out.
Yeah, I think this is going to be where the design differences that we have really changes the context of this card, because our cube is definitely more intentionally a little slower, and we also don't run. We're really not into Savannah lines, so we don't run much in the way of 1-drops that you're interested in bouncing. Like bouncing a Spyglass Siren or like a Thraben Inspector is not going to feel very good. And then on the other side of when it is good, I think I already favor blue decks into green decks in most environments. And like being able to bounce your opponent's 1-mana elf to really just set them back to the Stone Age for 1 mana seems very, very powerful. Your opponent loading up a Heartfire Hero and bouncing that seems really good. And everybody knows that I'm going to defend Heartfire Hero until my dying breath. So we're going to, I'm going to fight back against this card, because if I do go through the work of making a 4/4/5/5 Heartfire Hero, I don't want you bouncing it for 1 mana and drawing a card.
I mean, it really is a question of like, how often are you getting the 1 mana bonus versus how often would you want the instant speed on repulse, right? Like that's kind of the, if you're casting this as sorcery speed repulse 80-90% of the time, obviously I don't think that's worth it. But if you're getting enough value off of bouncing 1 mana spells, like, or 1 mana permanents, like, sure, there's something there. Obviously I wish it could hit tokens, like it still can for full price, but
if it was 1 or
like,
less.
It would be brutal to bounce like your opponent's like 4/4 token or something and draw a card for 1 mana. So sure. I kind of get why they didn't do that. But I like the idea of like sorcery speed repulse that trades 1 for 1 with your opponent's 1-drop on turn 1. I like the idea of that. Obviously, if your opponent plays like Thraben Inspector, you're going to be like, but like you wouldn't do that in the first place. So I don't know where I land on this. I really don't, because like the instant speed on repulse just like really pulls me in. I do like the comparison to Repeal, but Repeal's not a card that we currently play or have considered very much, so there's not like a direct comparison there as well. So I like the design of this card. I like what it does as far as like keeping pace with other 1-drops. It's basically like mental misstep, right? Like I'm gonna spend my first turn countering your first turn, but yeah, I don't know. It might be something that's just worth trying out over Repulse to kind of like get a feel for it, and then just reverting back to Repulse if we find that instant speed is just too important.
I'm playing both, just to be clear, but I also have a larger group than y'all, so it's easier for me to make those kinds of calls.
Yeah, it's a very interesting design, though. Teld, we got another cycler here that might be making a bad card playable.
Yeah, so next up is Trade the Helm. It's 4 and a blue for a sorcery with exchange control of target artifact or creature you control and target artifact or creature an opponent controls, and has cycling 2. All right, this is a historically terrible effect. This effect is usually like sub 50% win rate type card. I don't really expect this to be better, but I saw this one and wanted to talk about it because there's 2 things on it that I think are really interesting. The first is cycling on narrow cards is great as an option, because when these cards are good, they frequently will just win the game. And when they're bad, which is the majority of the time, they just rot in your hand. And so this card can you can buy out of it if you're against an aggro deck or something where trading is not going to be very good. The other thing is this being able to trade target artifact you control and target creature your opponent controls, because usually these either swap, like Switcheroo swaps target creature, and then I think it's Shifting Grift or some of the other variants swaps one of like the same card type. So you would have to swap artifact for artifact, which isn't very good. But if you can give your opponent, your portable hole, glass casket type card or a food token in exchange for their 4/4 or something, that's actually not a terrible deal. It kind of works out like a bit of a mind control at that point, because you're giving them something that isn't particularly valuable or worth near nothing. So I just thought this was a little more interesting than the average version of this effect for those 2 reasons. I think it's cool that they're trying to play around in this space that's just historically terrible and see what it takes to make this into like a playable card.
Sure. Yeah, the card that came to mind was Shrewd Negotiation, which even rereading that, you had to give them an artifact no matter what, so it was a little bit less flexible. This costs the exact same, and you get like full flexibility off of like exchanging a creature or artifact and taking a creature or artifact, and like you could give them an artifact land and take their best creature. You could give them a glass casket that is exiling their creature and take their best creature. Like there's a lot of flexibility to be able to give them an artifact and steal a creature. If it was just 1-for-1, it'd be pretty bad. And cycling wouldn't save it. And I don't know that this is the type of card that would even necessarily need cycling, right? Because they already push the effect beyond where it normally goes. So like I read this, and I'm sure we all read this as like, give your opponent a bad artifact, steal their best creature. And obviously there's a little bit of wiggle room. Like you can give them a bad creature and steal an artifact if like they have an Essence Reliquary going or something like that. But I don't know that this effect even really needs cycling, but it is something added to the card, because sometimes like these switcheroo effects are just like really poorly lined up for the board state. So this would be an interesting test card if we were to try it out. Like it's not exactly clear what deck wants this, probably like blue-white artifacts, but yeah, I agree that they probably turned the knob up on this just enough to like make it test worthy. Though I don't exactly know what like the best case scenario for the card is. Well, obviously the best case scenario is like, here, take my portable hole and I'm going to steal your Sifter Worm or something like that.
And just to be clear, I don't expect this card to be good or even not terrible. I just noted that it was better on multiple fronts than all the previous versions of this effect.
Yeah.
I disagree about your cycling take. I'm really happy that this card says cycling, so it can actually do something. So it's very it's so nice of them to give us an effect that the card can actually have. I just think this card template that they've tried so hard to make a thing, it's just mostly not a thing. I agree with you. The fact that you can trade your food token for creature is upside, but it's 5 mana. Like I want my 5 mana cards to be hammers all the time, and I don't think this is going to be a hammer enough time. But yeah, I mean, I do think I'll be cycling this quite often if it's in my deck for sure.
Yeah. This is where I have to come to the crossroads of like cube curator building somewhat spiky environments. Not necessarily as spiky as yours, obviously, because we do have a curation on this. But like between that and like someone appreciating the design, like I guess iterations that they've made.
Totally.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like mind control, like traditional Peasant Cube, mind control isn't uncommon, right? So you could just play mind control.
I don't think it's on Arena, but yeah, in paper.
Yeah, if you're on paper, yeah.
Okay. Let's go ahead and use that as a jumping point to move into black here with a couple artifact creatures to kick us off.
All right, so we have Wreckage Wickerfolk. Say that 10 times fast. It's 1 in black. No, it's 1 in black for an artifact creature Scarecrow. It's a common. It's a 1/3 with flying, and when this creature enters, surveil 2. So for those of you who aren't super plugged into the retail environment, I think there's a really good chance that this is just Black's best non-rare in the set, which is kind of funny that they made this a common, given the card that we're going to talk about next. Kind of a similar card, and that one's an uncommon. I think this one is just pretty clearly better. The reason why I think it's going to be the best card in retail is also why I like it so much in Cube. It's that it just kind of goes in everything. It's an artifact if you care about artifact synergies. It fills your yard if you care about that. It's also just a flyer if you care about flying, but the fact that it's not just mill 2, you actually are surveilling. This is not really a thing that Black has gotten access to on a cheap, reasonably bodied creature. The 2 comparisons that I had in my cube in Black were Desperate Bloodseeker and Mire Triton. These are 2 cards that ETB and mill 2 cards, and the fact that you get to surveil is way better. Surveil 2 on a 2-drop is so many surveils. You think about like Wary Thespian, which has been a solid common in many retail environments, and I even had it in my cube for a little while. That gives you surveil 1 on both sides, on the ETB and on death.
I was going to compare it to Brood Spinner, which obviously has a million more lines of text, but honestly, you could take the entire like activated ability off of Brood Spinner, and it would still be Black Green's best 2-drop or best card.
And so surveil 2 is just so incredible, either on turn 2 when you need to dig for lands or you're looking for your 3-drop. It's also incredible when you top deck this and you just get to bin 2 lands that you're about to draw. So I just think this effect is really, really strong. It might not feel like an amazing card, but I have a really hard time imagining that this isn't going to be a fantastic addition for Cube and the best Black card in the set, most likely.
Okay. I'm definitely way lower on this card than you are, it sounds like. I think this card's fine. Like, I do think Surveil 2 is good and it better than it reads, but I just have, I don't know, we talked about like sparking joy versus not, and this just is like, it is what it is. It's a 1/3 that like has some good value. I have no doubt this card is going to be a 17 lands banger and will be very good. I just don't get excited when I read the card. And I think I like it less than the next card, even if you're probably right that just having this effect as an ETB is probably better.
Yeah, I like it in theory. I bet if you play this on turn 2, you just feel good, right? Like you're going to get to play Magic, you get to shape up your hand, so having this card in your opening hand is nice, but like I don't see our players drafting this card. Like there's something about it that reads like
I think the same thing, yeah.
I don't necessarily know that they should, because it's like a fine package of things. It's an artifact, it's evasive, it surveils, it's a 2-drop. Like there's a lot of things going on for it. I could not actually see people drafting this and putting it in their deck, which is weird because like I imagine any deck where Mire Triton is good enough, this is also good enough. I would have a very hard time cutting Mire Triton to play this, would be my problem.
I think Mire Triton just in our environment at least reads better, like being able to just like it forces combat into spots where Mire Triton will always trade for something. Like Mire Triton always gets its man, which I think is something notable that this card doesn't do. Though I will say, I don't know what deck you're going to do this in, but curving this into Skilled Animator would be kind of cool.
It would be, yeah. The being an artifact does jump it up quite a bit. I think there are enough knobs on it that if it were in a cube, like I would be happy to play it in my decks. But black 2s are just so good these days that I would have a hard time finding a cut for either this or the next card, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but my basic argument is everything about the card that isn't the second half of the text box is the nice to have, and that Surveil 2 on a 2-drop that's very easy to cast is just incredibly strong, and that's not something that we have literally, I think, ever seen before. That's the way to get excited about this card if you're having a hard time getting excited about it. Is Surveil 2 on a 2-drop is huge. It's massive.
Yeah, it's deceptively strong.
Very, very strong. So, one of the things I would say is if you think you're going to have a hard time adding it, wait for a couple weeks until the retail environment has been played out a little bit, because I have a good feeling that this is going to be like a mythic common, because there is just no black deck in the environment that doesn't desperately want this card. And so everybody's going to want this card.
The classic wait for data to back us up.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, every deck wants it.
I could see that. Honestly, I could. I think this card is perfectly playable. My tribulation with it would be what 2-drop to cut for it, and I don't know that there's one I'm willing to cut for it.
Yeah. And it directly compares to the next one, which is an uncommon. That I was a little more excited about at first, but Denelius is probably right that the 1/3 is better. And this is Wretched Doll, so it's 1 in a black for a 3/1, also an artifact. You can pay black and tap it to surveil 1. So this kind of has in that like what was the name of the starfish card that like
Sinister Starfish?
Yeah, it kind of has those vibes where you play this early, it can attack or block reasonably well, and then if you get into like a protracted game, it's a relatively cheap way of trying to sculpt your draw over the course of the game. I like this card a lot, but I also tend to value these effects over time more than the one-shot Surveil 2. But again, if I'm being like kind of more just which one am I going to be most interested in having in my deck, the other card is the Scarecrow is probably a little better, if not much better.
Artifact is pulling a lot of weight on these cards. Like I don't think I'd be super interested in the Wicker Folk or Sundial or Wretched Doll if none of them were artifacts.
Yeah, so one of the things that the artifact is doing is helping Delirium, which I think is interesting given the fact that we just had some Dustborn cards that say Delirium on them. But yeah, for this card, and both of these obviously work really well in a Delirium shell because they're surveilling. But yeah, for me, a 3/1 versus a 1/3 flyer, I don't really have a strong preference, honestly, between those two bodies. I might prefer the 1/3 flyer, but I don't think there's a huge difference. If this didn't have a cost to the tap ability, then I think it was better. But in general, what I've seen over and over again is that when you tack on these, even though it seems like a small amount, it just means that there are turns where you're going to want to do this where you can't. Mm-hmm. And, just to get up to Surveil 2, which is what the Wicker Folk is giving you, ultimately the doll is costing you 4 mana for the 3/1 as opposed to just 2. So, yes, in a stall board state where the game's going to last for 10, 15 turns, this is going to be better. But I think way more often the ETB, especially when you draw it off the top and you just immediately get to bin those 2 lands, I think the Wicker Folk is generally going to play out better.
Yeah, agreed.
Who added Toy Story to the list here?
Yeah, so I added this one. So this is Packed Doll Terror. It's 3 in a black for a 3/4, also artifact creature toy. And whenever this creature or another artifact you control enters opponent each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. So I think this one's more environment dependent. I don't think this is...
Oh, you gain a life off this? I didn't realize you gained a life from this ability too. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this drain 1's when it ETBs, and then every artifact you play after that also drains 1. It's a little understated, 4 mana, no protection, kind of negligible ETB, though it's not nothing. So I think this is a bit environment dependent. This is something that I'm more interested in lower power synergy environments that are really pushing artifact themes. But you know, it curves. I think in retail environment, it'll curve really strongly into Haunt the Network. And then we make a lot of artifact tokens these days. I don't think this is good enough at 4 mana, but like I kind of like it nonetheless. Again, just like kind of a card that sticks out to me as like this will go in somebody's cube and be a really sweet card.
It seems amazing in the retail format.
Yeah, if there's a mythic common that's not Wreckage Wickerfolk, gosh, it's so...
Oh, this is a common. Wow, yeah, I didn't even notice that. I just assumed this was uncommon. Wow.
Yeah, if there's a mythic common other than Wickerfolk, it's this one. I think this card is nuts in the retail environment. My biggest problem with it in Cube, I'm glad you added it, honestly, because I was feeling a little bit sheepish about adding it. My biggest problem is it's just so narrow. It's only going in one space and no other space. But, Sekensen Smelter is narrow too. I just don't know that this has the power level of other narrow build-arounds that make me comfortable putting it in the cube. But yes, in an artifact deck, I think this is going to be incredible.
Yeah, so. The biggest issue I have with this card is that I sort of feel like this and Haunt the Network, we'll get to in a minute, but like I really like them for our Neo cube, and then I remember that almost every card in that cube is an artifact, and it's like, okay, well, this is just going to be like actually kill you, right? You're going to play this on 4, you untap with it and kill your opponent because you make just 5 artifacts or whatever.
Yeah, maybe that's fair because it is ultimately a 4-mana 3/4. But honestly, the fact that it gets the ETB, it just means that this is kind of a vampire spawn. It's a 4-mana vampire spawn in a lot of ways, and I love me a vampire spawn. So yeah. If you have tokens that you're making that are artifacts, I think this is a fine and good game, honestly.
Yeah. How much do we have to drain for before we're happy with this? Is it 2 drains?
2,
is it
probably?
Yeah, I was between 2 and 3. I wasn't sure because the stat line's a little anemic.
I think at 2, you're it's like 2.5 is how I put it.
Yeah.
I think 2 is a little bit less than what you want, but once you get to 3, you're real happy.
Yeah, because 3, you're talking about vampire sovereign,
Yeah,
like levels of drain. You're just Siege Rhino in at that point. It's just Siege Rhino. Okay, moving away from some of the artifact stuff for like 4 seconds. Sheffet Archfiend. Danelius, do you want to take this one? Another big cyclone creature.
Yes, this is 5 black for a creature demon uncommon. It's a 5/5. It has flying. When this creature enters, all other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn, and it has cycling 2. Very, very cool art. Very classic Magic art, which is... The art in this set is definitely all over the place, but whatever.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the art on the last 3 cards, but the Scarecrow looks really cool, and the other 2 are abominations.
Yeah, they're Dustmorn.
They've got a feel. They've got a feel to them.
All right, so the immediate card that this compares with is Archfiend of Sorrows, which, if you don't know, is a 7-mana big demon that, when it ETBs, gives your opponent's creatures -2/-2, and then that has Unearth, I think, for 5 mana, as opposed to cycling.
Oh, this isn't opponent creatures. Oh.
This is not an opponent. This is all other creatures. So
no, this is fair.
Yeah, exactly. That card is better. That card is better as a card. If you're casting, if you're spending 7 mana, that card is certainly better than this one. And I think that will be the case for almost any 7-mana card that you think is remotely cubable. They're probably going to be better when you're spending all 7 mana on this. The only reason why I care about this card is it says cycling 2 on it. And, one of the big complaints that I've gotten, or, comments that I've gotten from my players over the last 6 months or a year is just that the expensive cards don't really feel like they matter. They're not early picks. It's not that you won't ever play them, but you don't feel good about taking the card at any point in the draft, and you're really only really likely to play it if you find yourself in a ramp space or a heavy attrition space. And one of the ways that I've tried to, help that issue is put more expensive creatures in that have cheap buyouts. And so that's the only reason why I care about this. This is a card that doesn't cost 7 mana. It costs 2 mana 30% of the time, or 40% of the time, or whatever. And then the rest of the time, it is this big creature. The other thing is, yes, it is a card that you can cycle and reanimate if that's a thing that you're doing in your cube. And also, it does have cycling, which synergizes theoretically with the draw 2 stuff that is now by far the dominant blue-black strategy in my cube. So all of those things combined mean that I feel like this can get there. I think I'm going to test it purely because it is now, I think, the only black expensive card with this cheap buyout other than Troll Khazad-dûm. And so I'm interested in giving it a try for that reason alone.
Yeah, I sort of like it for similar reasons. I didn't realize it was symmetrical, which means that it's probably a card that people will complain about marginally less because you don't just get to plague wind your opponent and then kill them. But yeah, I think this card's cool. I like this. And one thing I've noticed, even in our environment, in both of our cubes, over the last year especially, is the shoving down of the curve. If you look at the decks that win in our cubes over the last, especially like 6 months to a year, like maybe post Modern Horizons 3-ish, just the curves got super, super tight and low. And it used to be like a year or two ago, I was on the Sultai train in the Peasant Cube, just playing like a bunch of 1 and 2 mana elves and then just a pile of 5, 6, 7 mana cards and doing pretty well with that archetype. And now it feels like even those decks, like you've cut the blue a lot of times because you can't afford to have the tap lands, and you're playing like green black. You're trying to like trade with 3 drops and really lean on Rutstein, and you've got like a Sifter Worm somewhere in your deck. So I definitely feel the like expensive cards have gotten much worse, and it's really been noticeable lately.
Yeah, I think one of the things that for the Jank Diver game in Peasant Cube that we're going to look at and discuss for the next update is reworking the sweepers so that like we're playing 2 red sweepers that are both asymmetrical and they just feel super brutal. And I'm kind of on board with just dropping a red sweeper altogether and going up a black sweeper. I have reasons for doing that or thinking that I'm not going to get into on the podcast, but this might be one of the black sweepers that I'm interested in. Like, I do want to be very clear. Archfiend of Sorrows is like a fundamentally broken card. So like the comparison is not exactly apt as far as like big demon that gives -2/-2, but we're also, I don't think we're on a lot of like big creature reanimation right now. Blood for Bones might be the last one that we're on, but we could always play things like Young Necromancer and stuff like that. And I do like, unlike the green creature we're going to talk about later, I think this just baseline is a card I would like to cast and put on the battlefield. So like the Cyclone is just upside to me. The Cyclone's kind of mandatory to make the card playable because it is 7 mana. But yeah, this is a very strong effect when it hits the board. So I like it. It might be the art drawing me in here a little bit, but I was always a fan of Archfiend of Sorrows because it won the game every time I cast it. And this feels like a more fair Archfiend of Sorrows if you want that sort of effect stapled to like a big creature. Grim Bobble. Somebody want to kick off the next Forever card for us?
Yeah, I'll do it quick. This is Grim Bobble. This is 1 black mana. For an artifact, it's a common. It says, when this artifact enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn. And then it has 2 and a black. Tap this and sacrifice this artifact to Surveil 2. This card's so cool. So happy to have this. Objectification in action. You get to Skyfisher this back to your hand and Essence Reliquary this back to your hand, but also it's just a reasonable rate thing that you're putting in play. It's an artifact, which in black-red, you're going to want to sacrifice this. Your Second Smelters, etc., etc., etc. I mean, this is purely a synergy. This is a synergy play more than it is anything else. If you don't have any synergies around this, I don't think the fact that you can sacrifice this for 3 to Surveil 2 makes it better than like an instant speed version of this effect. So you do want to have the synergies, but these days there's just synergies everywhere for permanents in play, especially if that permanent's an artifact. So easy include for I think both our queues.
Yeah, there's not even a lot of like discussion point to have on it. It's just it's not a direct strict upgrade to Disfigure, but should play out better than Disfigure in most matchups. Most times you would have Disfigure anyway.
Another one of those cards that, hey, you curve this into a skilled animator and you smack your opponent in the face for 5 after you disfigured them.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about this. I know, Tim, you're a little hesitant about it, but I've kind of embraced the artifacts are the future, old man kind of thing. I've really been like, I started kind of like, just pushing it as a bit of a joke, but I'm kind of on board to at some point look at like black green food, and I really love these like little artifact synergy package. I don't want to go too deep on it where it's just like everything is an artifact, but I really do enjoy these artifact package and synergy cards. I think they're just so much fun to play.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for it. I mean, I love the way like Osseous Stick Twister just kind of plays in the cube and stuff like that. So next up, Back on Track. This is a kind of just a big ball reanimator spell that has an interesting little twist to it. It's 4 and a black for a sorcery at uncommon. Return a creature or vehicle from your graveyard to the battlefield and create a 1/1 pilot. I actually probably could have just like removed this from the list to talk about because I don't know if that 1/1 that you get is really like enough of an upside over something like Defossilize or Young Necromancer or even a cheaper reanimation spell. So the real home for this would be reanimating like a Archaeomancer type creature right? Because then you're just putting a 1/1 on board. But I don't even know if that's that good. Like, you're paying 5 mana to get a 1/1 each turn. Like, that's really not that good either. So
no, what we really need is a Essaga's Chariot or a Parhelion 2 at Peasant. That's
something to pilot.
Some giant vehicle, because I think the upside this card really has is being able to reanimate a vehicle. So if you ever have a really good Peasant vehicle, none of the other reanimates actually target that.
Which might be a thing in limit. I don't know if you saw this during early access or not, but there's like the Detention Chariot, like 6 mana Banisher Priest vehicle. There's
what's the 7/7 Trample Haste from Kamigawa? There's a 7/7 vehicle for 7 mana. It's a Ko's vehicle and it has Trample and Haste, I think.
Yeah, the Thunder.
Yeah. That's what we want to be doing with this.
Dude.
The Thundering
Dude.
You know, it's interesting that you suggest that this could synergize well with vehicles, because there's actually a set coming out called Aetherdrift, and I've been promised that there's going to be playable Peasant vehicles in that set. So really excited.
I'm sure. Yeah. I can't wait till we get the spoiler for that set.
There is like a black-green gold vehicle that can cycle itself and destroys like a mana value 4 or less when it enters. So I assume if you're getting back a vehicle or creature that costs 6 or more mana, like, it's worth it. But in cube, probably not worth it over one of the other options. The pilot's just not that big of a deal.
I think I prefer Double Explorer to a pilot. I don't know that there's a massive difference in the truth. So I think this is like kind of like a lot of other cards in this set. It's a side grade, and your mileage may vary.
I see what you did there.
Right.
Because it's said about vehicles. Okay, well, buckle up for this next one. I'll read the next one here. So Momentum Breaker is 1 and a black for an uncommon enchantment with Stert Yer Engines. And when this enchantment enters, each opponent sacrifices a creature or vehicle of their choice. Each opponent who can't discards a card. You can pay 2 mana and sacrifice Momentum Breaker to gain life equal to your speed. So just immediate comparison to like Tithing Blade as far as like a permanent based edict goes. This one's an enchantment instead of an artifact. It has a buyout of gaining life and putting itself in the graveyard. Obviously, Tithing Blade has the craft, the sepulcher thing on the back of it. So there's like a little bit extra going on there too. I don't know. I guess whether you play this versus Tithing Blade really comes down to whether you care about artifact or enchantment more. I think something very interesting with Momentum Breaker is that if you play like a 1-drop creature and your opponent just doesn't have anything on turn 2, you can just run out Momentum Breaker and make them discard a card with it, even if they don't have a creature on board, and then start your engines, hit them, and go up to like 2 speed, which is not something you could ever even dream of doing with Tithing Blade, running it out on an empty board. Mm-hmm. So I do like that, like, you can always get the card out of their hand, even if they're not playing to the board. So it's a little bit better than like a typical edict effect in that scenario. I don't know how much stock I put in the gain in life, but this does get an enchantment into your graveyard. I think there are a lot of knobs on this to the point where, like, I think it might actually even be better than Tithing Blade unless you really care about the artifact subtype. But it is just it's an edict plus. Like, it comes down to this is just another version of an edict if you care about that sort of effect.
Yeah, I think your point about being able to play this, spend 2 mana on this if it's your only thing to do to make your opponent discard a card if they didn't play like a card on curve is pretty good. I mean, it's not incredible, but the fact that you can do that when you otherwise might not be able to spend your mana. I mean, obviously in modern Peasant, if you don't have a 2-drop, something's wrong, but you know, sometimes your hand just works out that like, okay, I've got this, I can spend 2 mana on it, and that's just, you know, now I can play my 3-drop on turn 3 and I'll pick this up later in the game or something, or I'll sack it. So I do kind of like that. I think that's a little bit of upside that is the kind of upside that isn't going to make a huge difference, but, you know, 1 out of X number of games, it's going to give you the opportunity to spend your mana and contribute to the game where you otherwise wouldn't have.
Well, the alternate text on this does make it a better card with Her Highness Essence Reliquary, because you know you're much more likely to just be jamming this over and over and over again.
Sure.
To rip your hand up.
Yeah. We have to talk about Essence Reliquary because of yesterday, but okay. we finally had somebody do the Journey to Nowhere loop, and people were not.
And they lost to Glassworks,
the person who was doing the loop lost the game, but like people were just like, wait, this is in the cube.
Yeah, it's a thing you can do. But so, you know, I really like what you said, Tim, about how there's a lot of little knobs on this. I think overall it's almost certainly worse than Witch's Vanity, but Witch's Vanity to me is one of the best black cards in my cube. And I do think overall that as a card, it is almost certainly better than Tithing Blade. I don't really care about the craft ability on Tithing Blade much at all. But Tithing Blade is an artifact. But I also don't play Tithing Blade. That's the other thing I'll say. I don't play Tithing Blade, and Tithing Blade's an artifact. So
I don't think we do either. We don't either.
Well, so to me, that's why for me this card is interesting, actually, because of the Stert Yer Engins text and the fact that it is Mardu. Stert Yer Engins is in Mardu, and the 2 gold Mardu cards that I'm interested in are both black. It kind of makes black the base Stert Yer Engins color, and this card and the next card we're going to talk about to me are the 2 cards that would make the most sense as black cards to add to the cube as Stert Yer Engine cards. So for me, as a package, I'm interested in this card, and not if you're not considering Stert Yer Engines.
Yeah, I'm interested in this, actually. I don't know if it makes it into our Peasant Cube, but I am interested in the whole package here. Danelius, there's actually one card in between Momentum Breaker and the other Stert Yer Engines cards, if you wanted to talk about the vehicle here.
Yeah, I'll read it quickly because this is, one of the only maybe kind of sort of playable vehicles that they gave us, which is bizarre to me because this is the vehicle set, but what can you do? So Carrion Cruiser is 2 and a black for an artifact vehicle uncommon. It's a 3/2 vehicle, and it says when this vehicle enters, mill 2 cards, then return a creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to your hand, and it has crew 1. So crew 1 is the right number. I'm really not, unless the ability is awesome, I don't want to see higher than crew 1 on vehicles that I'm playing. And, unfortunately, if you compare this card to, say, Under the Skin, it seems really quite awful because it only gets back creatures instead of getting back any permanent. And there's a massive, massive difference there when you just can't pick up the land that you milled on turn 3. It means that it's very hard to play this on turn 3 if you haven't already traded off your 2-drop. So I don't think this is good enough in the end. It's interesting. If you have a lot of artifact synergies, I could imagine convincing yourself that this is worth playing. Partially, I really just wanted to talk about this because I'm shocked. I'm utterly shocked at the incredible lack of playable vehicles they gave us in the vehicle set. And that's not just for Peasant. It's in the retail environment too. Like, I think that the biggest thing that people are going to get wrong in the first week of drafting the set is they're going to think that the vehicles are playable, and almost none of them are. And I don't really understand what they were trying to accomplish. It's just like you're just tricking your drafters, which to me is the number one sin you can have as a
41 vehicles in the main set.
This is a 3 mana uncommon. Why does this not? Okay, why is this so small? I think this could have easily been bigger. Why does this not have a keyword? Why does this not return any there's so many knobs they could have turned here on this, especially at uncommon, right? That I think would have made this an interesting card. Like, if you slap Menace on this, I'm at least like, all right, cool, we can buy back something and attack with it in our aggressive deck or whatever. I don't know, just like a 3/2 vanilla 3 mana card that I have to spend board presence to actually use as a creature, and it's conditional. I don't know.
I've been spoiled by Rutstein and
I'm used to our Gravediggers being busted, so that maybe this is just what they're supposed to look like. But this, I do agree with you. It feels like the vehicles are underpowered, and this set in general, I felt like was a step down from, and it felt like weird because I didn't feel like Foundations. It felt like after we jammed Foundations in, we would want the next set to be kind of maybe not on Duskborn's level, but fairly powerful.
I wouldn't mind if this is the new standard, but I totally agree. Compared to OTJ, I mean, obviously MH3 is an outlier. You can't compare anything to that. But even just compared to OTJ and Duskborn, this definitely felt like a step down in power level. But I think the reason why is because so much of the real estate of the set is made up of these vehicles that they're clearly terrified of pushing the power level on. I don't get why. Why wouldn't you want to make the vehicles the best part of your set when it's the vehicle set? I don't really get it.
Yeah, this would have been like if they had went really light on the sagas and Kamigawa. Kamigawa's the saga set, and what if we just made all the sagas terrible so they were traps?
Yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah, could have been pushed a little bit more, but I don't know. It's got cool art. Last, is this the last? Yeah, last black card. So the other Stert Yer Engines card. So Hour of Victory, 2 and a black for an uncommon enchantment with Stert Yer Engines. When it enters, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So 3 mana 2/2 is kind of the baseline here. At max speed, which I don't know if we mentioned it at all this episode, max speed is 4 speed. Once you hit 4 speed, you can't gain anymore. But max speed, 1 and a black, sacrifice this enchantment, search your library for any card, put it in your hand, and shuffle, activate as a sorcery. So this is, I think, is one of the more interesting cards to kind of discuss from the set, because it's not immediately apparent that it's even that good. But there's obviously a dream here, and I think we can kind of talk about where we think it'll land. But just to kind of parse it, 3 mana for a 2/2, pretty bad. But once you hit max speed, you can basically cash it in for Demonic Tutor, which is very good. And Tutorin, unmitigated Tutorin, just not something you really get at Peasant Cube outside of really bad cards like Diabolic Tutor or whatever. So, Yeah, where are we at on this? Like, do you need to have other Stert Yer Engines cards to get this going before you play it? Like, is 3 mana 2/2 just too bad of a starting line? Like, where are we at with Hour of Victory?
Okay, hear me out. We turn on Hour of Victory. I don't know how. I'll let Danelius figure that one out. And then we sack it. We go get Under the Skin. We Under the Skin this back, and then we replay it and go tutor up another card.
Oh yeah, once it's on max speed, if you can rebuy it, you just demonic tutor again. I guess it's 5 mana tutor at that point, but
that is the promise of this card to me, is that in your black green decks especially, you're going to be playing ways of rebuying this most likely, and this can just go find, let's search them out. Now that's not like an efficient way to win the game. It's just I win the game now. You're going to win the game, assuming you've reached turn 12 or whatever, you've made the game last an arbitrarily long amount of time. This will be a game-winning card, in my mind at least, and that's why I'm interested in it. I'm comparing both this and Momentum Breaker, which we were talking about before. If you kind of twist your brain around a little bit, they're kind of like cases or class enchantments where they give you a little value up front, and then they give you something to do with your mana later on. If you consider it all as one package, I actually don't think it's incredible, because I think 5 mana for a 2/2 Demonic Tutor is fine, but I don't think it's necessarily incredible. But it's the fact that you get to break this up into installments that makes it interesting.
Well, would you just play, like you said, that's not fine, but you would just play 5 mana 2/2 Demonic Tutor, wouldn't you? Like,
I mean, I guess, but I don't think it's great. I think that, if I have to pay 5 mana up front, I think it definitely gets a lot worse. But it's still, I mean, I don't think it'd be a bad card. 5 mana 2/2 draw card is awful. How much better is tutor than draw card? It's better, but I don't know that it's like,
sure,
2 mana better, which is basically what you're paying. So, in terms of the Stert Yer Engines part of this, it's like I was saying before, I don't necessarily think this needs other Stert Yer Engines cards in your deck in order to be at all playable, because it can get there on its own. That, you just play this and then you deal damage 4 times somehow. But it's way better as the second Stert Yer Engines card drawn. If you've already been doing engine stuff, then this gets way better. So that's how I view all the SYE cards, is that the second one drawn is just going to be better, and that makes me want to put multiple copies in my deck, and so I'm interested more in this stuff all as a package than as individual cards. If I have no other Stert Yer Engine cards in my cube, I don't think I would play this. But I think with some amount of additional Stert Yer Engine stuff in my cube, I am intrigued.
Okay, I do have to throw this card out here, because if you're not familiar with what this card is, this is the Basri and Zahur celebrate winning the race with the Aether Spark. And it was a bold move of WotC to make literally all of the marketing material about Chandra getting in this race so that she could win a Planeswalker Spark for Nissa and then have her lose the race. I will say, as far as subverting expectations go, didn't see that one coming. Didn't see that happening.
See, you made the mistake of having any idea what the story is or caring about it at all.
That's true. I just get all of my story information from Herald.
I was literally about to ask if Danelius has any affiliation with the lore, but I guess you just answered that. I was unsure if they ever revealed whose spark was in the Ether Spark. But anyway, that sounds like nobody cares. So
Ali from Cairo probably is my guess.
Ali of Cairo.
Ali from, okay, sure. Yeah, it's a Miojin of Night's Reaches.
Yep. That's what's powering the Ether Spark.
Okay, well, yeah, this is one of the cool, maybe not coolest, but most interesting cards to talk about. I'm not even sure if we'll test it or not, but there's definitely something unique going on with Hour of Victory. But that does move us into red. Unless you guys had any other notes about the Maraudin Mako, I think we can just skip over that. Haven't already talked about it, and just kick off red with Grease.
I do want to say the Maraudin Mako has cute little shark feet. I don't know if you saw.
He does have nasty little human shark feet, which I think is disgusting.
I did want to say one thing really quickly, which is just that I'm interested in this card with Mindless Conscription in like a red-black draw discard deck, as opposed to blue-red or blue-black. So I think there's like maybe some potential to explore in like a red-black version of this archetype. But anyways, keep going.
Sure. Okay, first red 1-drop, Grease Wrench Goblin. Talked about this for the mainline cube, actually. It's 1 red mana for a 2/1 uncommon Goblin Artificer, and it has Exhaust, which is an activated ability you can pay only once. 2 in a red, discard up to 2 cards, draw that many cards, and put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Hey, there's a way to discard a couple cards for your Mako or your Stingray.
Yeah, I think this card's great. I think this card is great without Mako and the Stingray. I think it's even better with them. I'd say that this is maybe the single best 1-drop now for red. Sorry, the best Savannah Lion for red, and I don't think it's particularly close, to be honest. This is exactly the kind of ability I want on a Savannah line is this. So yeah, very happy.
Yeah, I like everything about this in terms of what they're trying to do here, because I think the one of the problems I've seen with some of the other Savannah Lion, I guess, reconfigurations is they don't get bigger. And I don't think Savannah Lions having extra text is actually the problem. The problem is that 2-1 just gets bricked very early into the game. And I think getting this up to that second point of toughness and that third point of power just forces so many more trades on top of just the discard effect. But I actually think like the discard effect is super good, obviously, because you know, flooding is one of the ways you lose with your aggressive decks. But I really think just getting that little bit of extra stats is huge in terms of making sure these cards can continue to be played. And one of the things that I like about it too is sometimes just the threat of activating it, which we see more with Kelling, because that card can turn into a double striker, which is super dangerous. But just attacking and threatening to hold up the, okay, I'm going to put a +1 counter. Do you want to block and trade? And I get some value is like kind of good. Probably not on turn 3 exactly, but just, you know, fairly early into the game if you've been curving out. You know, by the time your opponent has a decent blocker, you might be able to threaten this. And then obviously that scales super well with any other sort of combat trick-esque effect.
It just feels so generous. Everything about this card, and to me, feels generous in the sense that you get to discard up to two cards. It's not discard 2 cards, it's up to 2 cards. It can be activated at instant speed. Yeah. It does make this larger. You're totally right that one of the primary ways that a Savannah Lion deck is going to lose is that you flood out. This helps with that tremendously, and it gets to synergize with cards in this set and all the draw 2 stuff. You know, this is a way better card with Mindless Conscription. Like this, you know, alongside Conscription just gets to activate it on its own. So I think this card is awesome. Really, really cool. It's not just a Savannah Lions. It's way cooler than just a Savannah Lions. Really happy about it.
For sure. It's wild. We talked about this in our mainline episode, but this effect was on a very bad vampire card from Midnight Hunt that had like a million restrictions on how it worked. And this is just like, all right, what if we just got rid of all of that and we'll throw in a +1 counter on top of it?
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's payoffs for using exhaust abilities in the mainline set as well. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff going on for 1 drop there. Next up, Teld actually said he was going to step away to get some water, but I think this is a Teld card that he added to the list.
I'll read it for him. So this is
go for it.
Magmakin Artillerist, 2 in a red for a creature elemental pirate. It's a common. It's a 1/4. And it says, whenever you discard 1 or more cards, this creature deals that much damage to each opponent. It has cycling for 1 in a red, and it says when you cycle this card, it deals 1 damage to an opponent. So I can imagine that, you know, what he's thinking here is that alongside the other draw 2 and discard synergies, that this becomes a potential payoff / support card because it does have cycling itself, but he is back, so I'm going to let him defend it.
Sure.
Okay.
Magmakin Artillerist. We were just trashing this card for 4 seconds.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm not sure this card is good, but I think it's very much a synergy card. I don't know. This is the kind of card that I just really like. I think if you've got plenty of discards, this is going to deal decent damage. It's got a decent defensive stat line that kind of blocks to buy you time to do the discard thing. Although I do think it's a little awkward that the rest of that mechanic seems a little aggressively pushed. I like that you can, and this is more of a retail thing, but if you're playing the Stert Yer Engines stuff, you can cycle this on your turn to guarantee that you get to up your speed counter by 1. If you're playing any sort of like Bloodthirst effects, you can obviously do that as well. I don't know if this card is very good. I think you need a very specific environment for it, but I would not be surprised if, 1, if you have that environment, this card ends up being very good, or 2, you told me in a year that there's a constructed deck that you know, is able to cycle a bunch of cards and, you know, broke the game or something because there's some sort of random discard outlet that breaks this.
Didn't we have this card in Ikoria, or was that the Stinger, or did that only trigger off cycling, not just discarding?
That one only triggered off cycling, yeah.
Okay, but very similar in that line. Yeah, cool synergy card. It's obviously not going to like make any of our cubes or anything like that, but if you are going ham on some sort of cycling package, it's here. Teld, I think it's appropriate that you be the one to read the super sweet dinosaur dragon mounts.
Yeah. So this is Drakasar Auxiliary. It's 4 red for a dinosaur dragon mount at uncommon. It has flying and haste. It's a 4/4, and when it attacks while saddled, it deals 2 to any target. It has saddle 3. I gave this the label of why was this type line not a rare? I've already expressed my grievances with this card. I think it's got big Peasant Glorybringer vibes. I think as far as it goes, like, it doesn't have a cheap buyout, which is concerning. Of course, we've talked about why that is. But This card's going to punch you in the face for 6 or like jam you for 4 while controlling the board quite frequently. Although I will say, one of the awkward things about this card is the saddle 3 is not free. So outside of Gruul, I'm not sure how often we're going to be able to saddle this up, attack, and then not die on the backswing if we're not killing our opponent with this. So take that with a grain of salt. But like, yeah, this has got like, I think the closest thing we've seen to Peasant Glorybringer as far as like cards that are legal in the Arena client.
Yeah, I have concerns for this, honestly, not just in Cube, but also in retail. We have had a lot of conversations about this card in the limited level ups Discord, and I definitely see the vision. I think it's a good card, but I think that the fail case here is large enough that I don't know that it's going to play out as well as it reads. Especially in Cube, where it's not stabilizing you on 6 mana enough in my mind. Like when you're behind, this is just not going to feel that good. So I do see this as mostly a red-green gold card where you're both likely to be assertive while also being happy to play a 6 mana assertive card. But in red-green, I do anticipate this being quite strong. That's kind of the only place that I see it being all that strong.
Yeah.
So
I kind of agree with you. I think that most of our other decks are just playing too efficient, too aggressive in the red space. But I do think this is kind of a banger for Gruul, though I will say one of the problems is we also have cards like Fear of Burning Alive already that I sort of feel like are kind of stealthy Gruul gold cards almost, and they're more reliable in what they do.
I want to see this played out more in retail before I have a strong opinion on it, because I can just imagine, situations where you go to cast this and you really need it to be a thing that you can block with, or a thing that stabilizes better because it costs 6 mana and it's just not going to do it. So, but on the other hand, there's going to be board states where your opponent is at 12 and they can't stop this from just killing them. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but I think for me, for Cube, I need my 6 drops these days that don't have cheap buyouts to more often be stabilizing plays, and I'm not convinced this is going to stabilize you. So it's probably a no for me, but I can see the appeal.
Yeah, I'm pretty low on this card as well, but that's mostly just because it wasn't some sort of banger rare.
Yeah, Volcanic Dragon is not a good enough baseline, so you really need to lean on saddle here. Though, hear me out. Throw from the saddle. It's a mount.
Yeah,
really entrenching that Gruul mount space, huh?
Can't get this one back with Shepherd of the Clouds, though. Unfortunately, it's too big. This is the type of card I would want to try, but again, Fear of Burning Alive is like, we're not going to add another red 6-drop. There's just no way. So I don't know. I have my suspicions that this card is better than it looks, but it is a 6-drop, and I've been scorned by 6-drops before. So special. They've started doing this rarity downshift thing with the special guests, where the cards that should be commons and uncommons are bumped down to commons and uncommons. I don't know if we've got that list yet, but I think it's safe to say Galvanic Blast will not be a mythic rare on Arena, so we're going to mention it here. This is a reprint, pretty well-known card. It's a single red mana for an instant, deals 2 damage to any target, and with Metalcraft, if you have 3 or more artifacts on board, it deals 4 damage to that target instead, which is like pretty huge upside. You're talking Ghostfire Slice at that point for a single red mana, and it's just shock. It's just strictly better shock as it is. So if you care about artifacts, if your red decks are capable of producing 3 artifacts, then like this is a card that you're definitely interested in. Nothing new though, just a very good artifact centric red removal spell.
And we now do have a lot. We have a lot of options at the 1-drop slot, and it's making it hard for me because I don't know that I necessarily want to play with all of them, because then you just have 7 different 1-drop removal spells. So yeah. I will say this card is definitely the best one. I'm just gonna go ahead and take my line in the sand here. This card is incredible. It still sees play in Legacy Pauper, as far as I'm aware, which is a format that, if you are not familiar with it, is extremely powerful. This card has always been great, and it is better now than it's ever been because of all the free artifacts we have floating around between artifact lands and blood, food tokens, and all that sort of stuff. Cards just randomly having the artifact type line, and I think it's just going to get better down the road. I think the only one you could argue is better is probably Unholy Heat, because that one can kill obscenely large creatures, but this is 4 damage to the face for 1 mana, which we've seen Ghostfire Slice when it does that is super powerful. And I think this card's going to be on more often than you expect if you're taking it early enough to like have that be something you're considering.
Yeah, Galvanic Blast, good card. Next one, unclear. I'll let Teld talk us through this one.
Yeah, so this is Burner Rocket. It's 1 in a red for an artifact vehicle 3/1 with flash. And when it enters, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains trampoline end of turn. And it has crew 1. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. I think my logical side is like, this card's probably not very good. It's a 3/1 for 2 with flash, which is like whatever. It's kind of got like combat trick on it, stapled onto it, which is nifty, but not necessarily all that good. But I just can't help but like this card. It's just kind of cool. Like he's got big Hearthstone energy as far as the art goes, so I kind of hate that. But like, I don't know, the design's just one of those cards that I was just like, oh, this is super cool. I don't know. I don't really have a lot of logical arguments for this card. I just like it. I think it's neat.
You're allowed to like things.
It's going to give Monstrous Rage a run for its money for sure. I think if this card costs 1, if it costs 1, I might be interested in it, honestly. But at 2, it's just too much. It's not going to help me in combat enough. And then I think vehicles like this, I kind of just view as food. They're just like a thing that's sitting there, and maybe it'll give you a little value. But like I don't. I don't love it. And 2 mana to make a food and give your creature 2+2/+0 trample is like, eh. So yeah, at 1 mana, I would have been intrigued by this for sure. But 2, I think it's 1 too
Some
many.
Rimrock Knight vibes here.
Yeah, I think being able to block. I think the thing I liked about it maybe is that the flash plus being able to block thing was kind of cute. Like, you know, your opponent like attacks and Witchstalker frenzies your blocker, so you flash this in, pump up another creature, use the creature that's dying to crew. Obviously, that's really convoluted of a line, but yeah, I don't know. Just one of those cards that I think all the knobs on this are turned to the neat mode of cards, and yeah, cool card.
Yeah, it's a fine design. Nothing wrong with the design. Next card's kind of a banger though.
Outpace Oblivion, 2 in a red, enchantment, uncommon. It says Stert Yer Engines, and then it says when this enchantment enters, it deals 5 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker, and then it has 2 sacrifice this enchantment. It deals 2 damage to each player who doesn't have max speed. So I did watch a little bit of early access, and one thing I'll note is that I think this is worse in retail than I thought it would be, because you don't have control really over your opponent's max speed, and so there are situations where your opponent has max speed and you don't, and this literally says nothing. There's no value at all to the sacrifice, and as soon as they get to max speed, it just has no value at all to the sacrifice. However, in Cube, you have to assume that if you're the one with Stert Yer Engine cards in your deck, your opponent won't, and they will never have max speed. And this will always be something that's dealing 2 damage to them. Now, it might also at times be dealing 2 damage to you, but that it at least is up to you whether or not to activate it at that point. So 3 mana for 5 damage, I think, is slightly above or below rate, I guess you could say, because these days we have 3 mana for 5 damage, but the cost can be reduced if you control an equipment. Or there's 3 mana for 4 damage of instant speed, but
Fiery Annihilation, Soul Seer, like instant speed versions.
There's also Scorching Shot, which is push this down to 2 mana if you can do the mana cost of red.
Correct. However, even disregarding the Stert Yer Engines text on this is a permanent, and as we know, we here at Jank absolutely love permanents. So you can Essence Reliquary this, you can Skyfisher this, etc., etc. So
the year is 2027. There are no instants and sorceries in Peasant Cubes.
Exactly.
Gruul Spells is in shambles. All right, I got to say Gruul Spells. Is it Spells is in shambles?
Yeah, right. So I know that y'all play Glassworks, and for me, I can't bring myself to do that because that can't even kill a canyon crab, but this can. And so that I do think that 5 is meaningfully different than 4, and totally disregarding the Engines text, I think this is a card I would definitely consider. But the Engines text, I think, is definitely relevant, not just... I think on its own, the engine text is relevant, or the max speed text, I should say, is relevant.
Yeah. And
then again, as a part of like a 7-card package, I think I'm very interested.
Yeah, I mean, for Glassworks, upgrading to 5 damage is pretty big. It means that it now kills cards like Colossodactyl and Canyon Crab that otherwise would get missed. And then how often, you have to ask yourself, how often is the 5 mana deal 1 at the end of turn thing going to actually deal more than 2 damage in a game of Magic the Gathering? And I'll be honest, I played a bunch of Duskmourn, and I'm not sure how often I saw people take more than 3 damage from a Shattered Yard, and in Peasant Cube, you use that even less. So I think most of the time, this is going to be a substantially higher amount of damage than your Shattered Yard would otherwise output in Peasant Cube.
Well, one more thing about this is that it's a permanent that sits in play, which is good with your Essence Reliquaries and your Skyfishers, but it also puts itself in the yard, so you can return it with your Under the Skins and other things, which you can't do with Glassworks.
Gives you fuel for Delirium. Yeah, it does a bunch of stuff like that.
It's also a card where it thematically makes sense to have the word Stert Yer Engines on it. I don't know about you, but the like crossing the finish line card having Stert Yer Engines on it is just like makes me want to gag a little bit. But anyway, flavor implications there.
Yeah, sweet card.
Yeah. Very cool card.
Yep, and we talked about this for the mainline cube as well. It's probably going to make the cut there as well.
Yeah, so
last red card?
Yeah, last red card. This is Fuel the Flames. So this is 2 in a red for an instant. Deal 2 to each creature, cycling 2. I don't think this is the kind of card that really is going to bring up a lot of talk about it, but I mean, I mentioned that in the mainline.
I love this card.
Yeah, I mentioned in the mainline set that when you add these sort of sweeper effects that are very conditionally powerful, you put cycling on them so that you can get rid of them into bad matchups. They become much better. Being instant is kind of the standard on these now, I guess. I think this is a healthier card than some of the other one-sided damage dealing effects that we've been running. I don't know exactly what the correct optimization of those are supposed to look like, because the complaint cycle goes, the one-sided sweepers are wiping my board, but the reason they wipe my board is that every card I played made like 3 1/1s. So if I didn't have those, I would be able to kill my opponent, but instead they had the card, so now I lose the game. So I don't know. Like, I think this is definitely healthier, but I do think in Peasant, one of the concerns I have moving forward is just how many cards now are incidentally making just infinite creature bodies. And so, like, how do you do that? How do you balance that without them being complete feels bads when you have the hoser?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's like not great by comparison to something like Seismic Wave or whatever, if you're playing the Young Pyromancer version of like Is It or something like that. But like plenty of Gruul decks will just be able to main deck this now instead of having to make a decision about main decking a sweeper. The blue-red decks that are more focused on like Eddie Mercrab, Hearth Elemental, that sort of stuff, like this obviously just fits there the same way a different red sweeper would. So I think there are enough homes. Like, plus like your Rakdos decks that are full of little creatures weren't really playing sweepers anyway. Like, I guess you could play like Rao in the Implicit Maze and stuff like that because they're just kind of generically good cards. But I agree. I think the exact term I would use is healthy. Like, I think this is just a healthy version of the red sweepers that we want in our cube, because the red sweepers we have been playing, like Fearfire Foes, Seismic Wave, Rao in the Implicit Maze, they're just so backbreaking against the decks they're good against because they don't affect you at all and they often give you extra value on top of this. And I mean, the cyclone here I think matters quite a bit because like you want to main deck your sweepers, but sometimes they are just kind of completely dead cards. Giving you the buyout to a really powerful card for certain matchups I think is nice. Moving to green, I guess I have to defend myself on the first card here because the comments made it sound like I'm going to be put to the test here. But much like Burner Rocket for or Teld, Molt Tender in green is kind of like a card that's going to fit into pet card territory for me. It's not something I'm going to actively like tell every cube designer out there to start running, but Molt Tender is the first green card. It's a single green for a 1/1 uncommon insect druid, and it has 2 activated abilities. First one is tap, mill a card. Second one is tap, exile a card from your graveyard, add 1 mana of any color. This is just Deathray Shaman. I don't understand what the problem is.
Yeah, just Deathray Shaman. Definitely.
Like what? Yeah, it has a 1 less point of toughness, but like, come on. Okay, so I before like people tell me why the card's actually bad. Like, I get that the card is not like amazing, but I do like it as a synergy piece if you are doing anything with like the removing cards from your graveyards type thing, the Insidious Roots type thing, which is kind of where our Golgari deck is focused right now. And like, yeah, it's a fine mana. This isn't actually like an excellent mana dork or anything, but I personally just very strongly hate cards like Land of War Elves and stuff like that. Like, I wouldn't advocate for cutting Land of War Elves to play Molt Tender, but I do think playing a Molt Tender over a Land of War Elves is just a way more interesting thing to be doing and turns it into a synergy piece. I'm also like, I'm in love with cards like Death Bonnet Sprout and stuff like that, like incidental mill cards over time. I think they feel those strategies quite nicely, but like, for Peasant Cubers at large, I will not pretend that this card is stronger than Elvish Mystic or Land of War Elves or what have you. It's just something that I like in a deck that I'm very fond of right now.
Yeah, that's all fair. And I think if you're playing a 360 cube with Insidious Roots, it makes a lot of sense to include this card. I can definitely imagine it. I think just as a generic card, I think it's not good enough. The problem with dorks is that they're terrible top decks. They're awful top decks. And what you want on the other side of that, to like kind of balance out how awful they are as top decks, is that they're incredible on turn 1. And this just isn't incredible on turn 1 because it doesn't ramp you to 3. It can ramp you to 4 on turn 2. I mean, it can ramp you to 3 in some very narrow circumstances. And so that's, if you're playing a lot of ways, I guess, to incidentally put cards into your yard kind of for free on turn 2, different fetch lands, I suppose. But all the fetch lands in Peasant are
it won't let you
tapped,
cast
so.
a 3-drop on 3, but you might be able to make 3 mana's worth of spells on 2 or whatever.
It just, to me, it's very narrow. I can understand it in like a green-black roots deck, but that's kind of the only place I really want it, and so for me, it doesn't make it. But yes, I can totally understand in a small cube with roots that this card can be a banger for sure.
It's 100% tied to cards like Roots and Cadaver Lab and whatever other payoffs there are. Chalk Outline I've actually found to be kind of weak. Yeah, no more defense of the card needed. It's great. Deathrite Shaman at uncommon. Stampeding Scurry Foot. Just had to get the 1-drop mouse in here.
Yeah. Everybody knows I love a good 1-drop mouse. This one is probably less good than the red one, but this is a single green for a 1/1 mouse with exhaust, 3 and a green. Put a +1 counter on this creature and create a 3/3 elephant creature token. I mean, this cute little guy's five worth of stats for 5 mana that we get to break up across multiple things in a color that's good at picking up things and reusing them. I don't know.
Seems fine. I mean, if you think about it as 5 mana for 5/5 worth of stats, like that's okay. Obviously, there are better cards at 5 mana doing better things than that, but you get to play this as a 1-drop. I don't think we would ever make room for this in our cube unless we had like Abiding Grace or something like that. But I don't think the card is embarrassing.
I will say I do like it a lot in the retail environment with Elvish Refueler, which lets you redo your exhausts every turn. Basically, I think it's a very hot combo with that in retail. But yeah, I play Incubation Sac in my cube, which is similar. But the whole point of Sac is that it's a thing that you can activate kind of an infinite number of times because you can keep rebuying it too with other effects and keep going. So the fact that this is a 1-shot for me just makes it kind of a little too weak, but it's a cool card
for sure. Anyways, you actually added one that I find quite interesting the more that I've thought about it after you added it here.
Yeah, so this was a surprise to me when I realized kind of what's on Arena and what's not on Arena. So this is Fang Guardian. It's 3 and a green for a creature ape druid. It's an uncommon 4/2. It has flash, and when this creature enters, another target creature or vehicle you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So a couple notes. Really why I thought about it is I was going through my tier list for Aetherdrift, and Fang Guardian was like one of my top green cards, and I realized that I hadn't included it on this list, and I was wondering why. And the reason why is because I was thinking in my head, well, this is worse than Briarhorn, for instance, which is a really good. Actually, don't know what set Briarhorn is from. Maybe MH1.
Lorwyn.
Laura. Oh, okay, Lauren. All right. Okay, so that's a 4 mana for a 3/3 that has flash, and ETB gives a creature +3/+3, and that has Evoke. And so that card is like certainly better than this card, no doubt about it.
Yeah, that's one I hope we one day get.
Yeah, we don't have that card on Arena, and actually we don't have any of this template card on Arena of the flash 4-drop creature that comes into play and gives the creature a bonus. This now is the only kind of version of this card that we have access to on Arena. There's also Briarpack Alpha, I want to say, is a paper card that you could argue is maybe better than this, but I will say that the 4/2 stat line on this effect, I think, is meaningfully better, because if I'm imagining the kinds of places I want this card, it's essentially teamer aggro, where you're leveraging trample and you're leveraging flash and bounce, and you're just trying to get through with little attacks, but you tap down their blocker and you get through for 4 kind of stuff. So I think that in that kind of a space, I do prefer having the 4/2 as opposed to a 3/3. And this is, again, the first one of its kind on Arena. And part of my consideration here is just that I kind of hate the green 4s that we have access to. It's essentially like Elvish Regrower, it's Timeless Witness, and it's the 4 mana 3/3 draw card from Seraph Backmate. And then you can play
a billion 4 mana 4/4s with trample.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There's a million 4/4s with trample that are fine, and none of them are really better than the next one in my mind. And all of that makes me interested in at least testing this. And I like that it is kind of a signpost for blue-green tempo. And there's not really a lot of that at all at the moment in my cube. I think this would be at its best in a blue-green deck. So all that together means I'm interested in testing it. I don't know if it's good enough.
So I think what I would generally say is I think Bannerhide Crowshock is the better version of those 4 mana 4/4 with trample. However, the reason I like that card is that it is a pretty good combat trick. So I could be sold that this one-shot effect is it might be better because you get to put the creature into play as well, right? And did you know this turns your Heartfire hero into a 4/4?
Whoa.
you're not gonna have to work very hard to sell me on this one. I mean, it's a like flash tempo combat trick creature. These are just like cards that I think are super fun to play with. See my previous comments on Burner Rocket, except this is probably actually good. Yeah, I think this card looks cool. I like this sort of effect. I think this is the kind of card I want to be playing with when I'm playing my green decks. I love playing that Oonga Boonga space of just like, I'm going to attack you and like do something degenerate when you choose to block.
Yeah, I agree that this is certainly more interesting than the 12th 4-mana 4/4 trample that we have been discussing over the last year or so. That always kind of like fills in that last green 4-drop slot. I can see a world where it's actually not that good. You ever have to run it out without the pump, like it's pretty miserable, and you do get into those situations sometimes, like especially if you're playing like Gruul or something. You do sometimes get a matchup where your opponent just picks off all your creatures one by one, and then like you're holding this in your hand and you're like, eh.
On the other hand, this against those same decks also gives you the ability to instep, put a creature into play, and then untap, play another one, and that sometimes can slip through the removal / counterspell.
Flash is good against those sorts of decks for sure. Though it is 4-mana 4/2, so like they're just like shock it, boop, out of the way. But yeah, I think this is if you want a little bit of variety in the 4-drop slot and you don't want to have to play cards like the next one I'm going to talk about real quick. They probably should have put that one first. Now it's just like super this poor transitioning of 4-drops here. So I wanted to mention this for a reason. So the next card is Hazard of the Dunes. One of the big reasons I wanted to mention is this card has absolutely sick art, and they just like made it look terrible on the actual card. So if you want to see some really cool sandworm art, go look up the full art of Hazard of the Dunes and look how poorly they cropped it, because they did not do justice to this card. That said, the card is 3 and a green for a 4/4 common worm with trample, reach, and exhaust for 6 and a green. Put 3 +1/+1 counters on this creature, so it can become a 7/7 reach trample later in the game. I don't want to go to bat for this card necessarily, because the reason I would play this is if people felt like the exhaust ability was meaningfully better than the 5th point of toughness on Colossadactyl, which is a card we play right now. That one's 2 GG for a 4/5 trample reach, so the hazard's a little bit easier to cast, but is missing a 5th point of toughness. One thing I wanted to note here, though, is the more we get cards like Outpace Oblivion and Witchstalker Frenzy and Scorch and Shot, and the more removal that can deal with 5 toughness creature, the less the 5th point of toughness actually matters, like compared to a 4/4. So there's probably a world where like if all, X number of removal spells can kill your 4-mana 4/5, then you would just rather have the 4-mana 4/4 with some late game ability. So I don't know that we're there yet. Murmur and Mystic still holding down the fort with 5 toughness. Obviously, like, we're not at the point where 5 toughness creatures are just always killing over, but I think we're approaching that point. Like, it feels like the 3 mana deal 5 or 2 mana deal 5 is kind of the norm. Like, we get an uncommon like that in every set. So there's probably a point at which, like, the 5th toughness is not actually, like, a selling point on a card compared to something with a late game mana sink like this. But yeah, Hazard of the Dunes is just kind of like a whatever card for now until we get to that point.
Yeah, at that point, you're kind of just probably looking for more Mole Drifters or something. But, for those who are a little older, it's my toughness and I need it now. I feel like Colossadactyl's 5th point of toughness immediately is the entire reason to play the card. It is a stat monster. There's nothing that really competes with it.
Did you get that J.G. Wentworth reference, people? Did you guys get that?
I did not. I'm old as hell, and I didn't even get that reference yet.
Okay, well,
I'm glad someone appreciates my terrible
877 cash now, my friend. 877 cash now.
Yeah, I think the entire reason to play Colossadactyl, though, is that 5th point of toughness. It is usually going to be enough to brick the board, and I think when you downgrade that to 4 toughness, it just gets traded into by a lot of more creatures a lot more easily. I do agree with you, though, that the Colossadactyl 5th point of toughness stat line is rapidly approaching its expiration date, so I look forward to the next time we get a dinosaur that's a 4/6.
All right, we got some chunky 6-drops to talk about. Who wants to go ahead and take the elephant?
You mean Grave Titan? I'll hand Grave Titan here. So this is Autarch Mammoth. This is 4 green for creature elephant mount. It's an uncommon 5/5. When this creature enters and whenever it attacks while saddled, create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Unfortunately, its saddle cost is 5. Saddle 5 is quite high.
It's huge.
That being said, this is kind of Grave Titan adjacent. We were talking before about the dragon that was, Glorybringer in Peasant. I think this is more Grave Titan in Peasant than that last card was Glorybringer in Peasant. What I want out of my expensive creatures is that they stabilize the board well. And this does stabilize the board pretty well. It doesn't gain life, and it doesn't stop flyers, and both those things matter a lot. I think in Peasant, a lot of the aggro decks that you want this card to be able to stabilize against are going to have flyers, and so that is a bummer. On the other hand, as a big assertive card, this card is way better. And yes, Saddle 5 is quite a lot, but if you're tapping down 5 power worth of creatures, it's really nice that your payoff for doing that is you get to put 3/3 more power toughness into play. So of the 6 mana cards that don't have buyouts, I'm playing stuff like Rise of the Ants, I'm playing Howling Giant. That's kind of what I'm comparing this card with, and I don't know how I feel about this card versus those. I can imagine it playing better just because if they don't have the removal spell for this, I think it will run away with the game quite often. So I'm in general trying to reduce the number of expensive creatures in my environment that don't have cheap buyouts, and so that might be a reason enough to just not even try it. But as a comparison with Rise of the Ants with Howling Giant, I think there's something here. It is just a lot of stats, so I'm probably going to test it.
Throw from the saddle, my guy. Throw from the saddle. What are we not getting about this today?
Yeah, so as far as Rise of the Ants goes, I have been so impressed by that card that I'm going to have to be proven wrong before I will ever dislodge that card. It's going to have to either literally be directly better or going to have to take a lot of convincing, I think, because I think that card is one of the best stabilizing cards in our particular environment. That being said, as far as other expensive cards that we have that don't have buyout options, I mean, we're looking at Ferris, Band Brawler, and Sifter Worm. And Sifter Worm's in the same category as Rise of the Ants, but Ferris Band Brawler is kind of a replaceable card, even if it is pretty good. So I can see trying this. I think it's very good. It's a lot of stats. If, like you said, if you untap with it, you probably run away with the game. Another thing is in the green decks where you're able to recur this a bunch of times, it puts your opponent on kind of like they need an exile spell some percentage of the time, because otherwise you're just going to keep recurring this. I think it's a little weird too that you won't have to have this happen in Cube very often, and maybe it'll happen in retail though, where the elephants can saddle each other to like trigger more elephants. That's just weird for me, but
yeah.
It's a flavor win. Yeah.
Anatomically correct elephants. Although why does this elephant have like a man ear, like a little baby boy ear?
I like the idea of you saddle your elephant with like an elephant and a zombie or something like that. It is pretty funny to think about.
Oh, you like that? You like that idea?
I think it's pretty fun.
All right. Well, this is the last episode we're gonna have Danelius. All right. 6 drops with buyouts. Hit me.
Sure, so this is Migrating Ketradon, 4 green for a creature dinosaur common, 6/6. It has reach. When this creature enters, you gain 4 life, and it has cycling too, very importantly. So it's funny because this card basically sits on the complete other side of the spectrum as the last card. It is certainly not nearly as impressive as an assertive card that you're trying to win the game with than the Mammoth. On the other hand, it stabilizes. It doesn't stabilize better than the Mammoth. I shouldn't say that because you're putting fewer stats into play. But it gains life on ETB and it has reach. So against flyers, it is way better than the Mammoth is. But the reason to play this card is the cycling too. That is the whole point, and that's what I've been trying to get more of into my cube. Ravenous Lindworm with cycling, I think, is a very interesting card to consider. So I don't know. I don't think I can test both these cards in my cube. I might try out both at different times just to see how they play, but I have a hard time imagining that this isn't going to feel really good in the cube. It reminds me of Generous Ent for sure. Not maybe not quite as strong as Generous Ent, but in some situations it'll be way better. So yeah, the real question becomes: are we reaching a point in cube where you just can't afford to play the big creatures that don't have cheap buyouts, or maybe to put it better, if you have options for expensive cards that stand up that also have cheap buyouts, it's just there's no reason to play other versions, and I'm not sure that we're there yet, but I think we're approaching it.
I mean, I just commented about how good I think Sifter Worm is. I don't think this is better, but I do like that it has cheap buyout. But I will tell you, OTJ the last year kind of spoiled me, because my first thought to this one is like, why don't I gain life when I cycle? My Armadillo would have gave me life when I cycled it.
two things. So first off, Teld, I think you should like stone face suggest this as a Huatley target for the mainline cube. Like just bring it up like, yeah, I think we should make room for this. Second thing, and I hate to keep doing this, but the dinosaur is like blowing up some sort of like goblin buggy, and for whatever reason there's these two flames on the bottom of the card that look like they were digitally added on top of the art, like on a whole different layer, and at a glance it looks like the Mozilla Firefox like logo is just dancing on the card. Like it looks like a sticker on top of the card. I hate it because the art actually kind of looks good otherwise, and then you see it and you can never unsee these stupid little flames on the card. But
well, also, why is it destroying a buggy when this is a gain life card, not a destroyed target artifact creature?
Well, it prevented the 4 life that you were gonna take from this machine. I don't know, the Muraganda stuff.
Gotcha. Okay, we're just blocking.
Yeah. Okay, I'm actually really excited for the next card, even though it's kind of just a generic effect and kind of proves the point we made last year about Modern Horizons 3 spoiling everything and being best in class for everything, because, Malevolent Rumble is just going to be the best version of this effect forever and ever. But we have Dredger's Insight, which is 1 and a green for an uncommon enchantment. Whenever 1 or more artifact and or creature cards leave your graveyard, gain a life. Fine little payoff there, but nothing huge. When this enchantment enters, mill 4 cards. You may put an artifact, creature, or land card from among them into your hand. So I totally agree with the statement here that Malevolent Rumble is better than this 9 times out of 10. But Dredger's Insight, I think, is just automatically the second best version of this kind of like mill get a permanent thing, because it is a permanent itself. And you just get incidental life gain. Like, that's not nothing. Like, this is going to gain you a life when it enters the battlefield, because it's going to pick up a card immediately, and then you're probably going to gain in decks that can do the kind of like graveyard sift-in type thing. You're going to gain like maybe 2-3 extra life throughout the course of the game. So if you think about this as like 2 mana, fill up your graveyard, get a permanent back, gain 3 or 4 life, that's pretty strong. Even though, as it's been pointed out, the downside here is that this can't pick up other enchantments, so it couldn't actually find like your Insidious Roots or something like that, which is a meaningful downside, but not enough to like knock it down in my estimation.
Yeah, so 2 things here. One, I find it super weird that this can get lands out of the yard, but it does not trigger the life gain when a land leaves your graveyard, which makes it template a little weird. You know, usually those effects are very
sure,
parallel or symmetrical or whatever. The other thing is I think the life gain, I think, is actually pretty meaningful, in that what I see sometimes with the green-black deck is, I mean, obviously, like, the way you lose with that deck once you've stabilized is your opponent has some sort of reach and usually is trying to line it up where they can hit you for like Exacxies, you know, a turn before you're able to kill them. And so if you're able to gain, you know, a few life off of this, and sometimes it'll be more than a couple life, but most of the time, probably a couple of life, it might put you out of range of dying and be able to kill them on the following turn. So I do think it's pretty good. And then there's occasionally those games where you're doing like the full blown, we're just, you know, rootsing off and we're going to gain like 8 or 9 life off this card, and then it'll be super good.
Yeah. So I'm actually really depressed about the templating on this card, because I think that it was really close to actually being cracked, like really cracked. And this is a card that I've changed my mind on since seeing the early access event. So if this had been an artifact, I would have loved it so much more, because, you know, it's a card that cares about artifacts, but it's not an artifact itself. It's an enchantment that can't pick up other enchantments, so it can't pick up roots. But it also just can't pick up your cases. It can't pick up your class enchantments. And I would imagine that when you're playing this in Cube, that, you know, you really want this to be able to get your Hunter's Talent. The fact that it can't is definitely a bummer. I think that life gain is incredible. I saw a few different early access games where this combined with Earth Rumbler, the card that can exile a card from the yard to animate itself, that gained like 10 or 15 life over the course of the game. And the fact that that's just kind of stapled on to this effect, that even without the life gain, I'd be interested in this, given the fact that it's a permanent version of this effect that you can pick up and keep casting. Though it was pointed out, you know, how many times do you actually really want to pick this up and keep casting? Or aren't you going to kind of deck yourself pretty aggressively? So this isn't really an Essence Reliquary card as much as it is a Sticky Tongue card where you're looking to pick it up once and replay it once just to really stock your yard. Yeah,
the other thing with this card too is the Agatha's Champion is a card that is super powerful, but sometimes you have to do a little more deck building to actually fit it into your deck, especially in the black-green decks. And I think this is like a nice, elegant way of being able to slot that card into your deck with minimal effort. You know, it's just a card that will like incidentally let you do that, which I think is pretty nice.
My general thought on this is if they had templated it slightly differently and they had turned the knobs so that this was either an artifact itself, or you gained life off of lands, or it could pick up enchantments. If they turned any of those knobs, I might actually be willing to say that this is better than Rumble, because the upside from that life gain, I think, is actually way bigger than I was originally thinking that it was. As is, I still prefer Rumble, but I'm willing to test this. I don't currently play with kind of two versions of the Rumble effect, and I'm definitely now willing to try just because I think the life gain matters a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we're still on grapple with the pass, so like I'm very happy. That's just like a huge upgrade as far as we're concerned. So yeah, I'm very excited about this card. Like I said with the Molt Tender, like the Insidious Roots stuff is kind of like my baby package right now. And maybe at some point, like if they don't keep pushing this territory for green-black, like it just doesn't get enough support later on down the line to keep it around. But for now, it is kind of like something I'm always on the lookout for when it comes to new cards like this. And this one just kind of like slots in perfectly. Like it was clearly designed to kind of work with that package of cards. Which same goes for the next one. You actually just mentioned this. The last green card here is Earth Rumbler. This is 4 and a green for a 7/6 vehicle with Vigilance, Trample, and Crew 3. Big stats, big keywords. You can also crew it by exiling an artifact or creature card from your graveyard, which you can do at instant speed as well, which is, I think, a lot bigger than it sounds. I kind of added this as like a test-worthy synergy card, but the more I read it, the more I think about it. Like, I think the numbers are just pushed on it to be like a really just good stompy card. Like 7/6 Trample Vigilance is huge, and being able to like crew on defense without having to necessarily tap a creature is huge. And then the thing that really pulled me in to, you know, kind of beat a dead horse here is this card is kind of nuts with Insidious Roots, right? Like maybe like an artifact vehicle isn't the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Insidious Roots, but the fact that you can just systematically exile every single creature and artifact from your graveyard, like one at a time, lets you just turn every single creature in your graveyard into a Roots trigger immediately. Like you play this, you have 6 creatures in your graveyard, you just get 6 Roots triggers right away at instant speed if you want it. And same with like Cadaver Lab. If you have that just sitting in play, every single turn of the game, you just be like, okay, I'm going to eat something from my graveyard, I'm going to make a 2/2, eat something from my graveyard, make a 2/2. So like the unmitigated access to like exiling cards from your own graveyard turns it into a synergy piece, while the Gruul decks just kind of might be able to make use of this as just a gigantic creature.
Yeah, I agree. I was very down on this originally when they spoiled it. I thought there was no way that I would be interested in it, either in draft or in cube, and I definitely have come around to it. I saw the synergy with it, with Dredger's Insight, where it was sweet because it was a threat of activation almost, where the opponent couldn't really go for a lethal attack, because if they went all out, you know, the Earth Rumbler player could just say, okay, I'll exile my whole yard and gain 10 life. But they didn't have to do that. They could leave that stuff in there as a resource up until the point where that was really necessary. And it is just so huge. And the fact it being so huge would matter less if it didn't have Vigilance and Trample. Like, both of those keywords are very relevant on a massive creature. So in general, I hate cards like this that are 5 mana for just one piece of cardboard. But you're right, the synergy, another potential synergy with this is stuff like Animating Fairy or Kenku Artificer, where it doesn't really work with Zoetic Glyph because that turns the creature into a 5/4. But with
10 power,
exactly. With Artificer and Animating Fairy, you can just turn this into a game-winning card very quickly. So I think there's enough here that I'm at least intrigued. Ultimately, 5 mana, no ETB. It does have also a little bit of built-in protection because it's not a creature on your opponent's turns, and so. It's difficult to nab with some like creature removal specifically, unless it's instant speed. So and it's obviously huge, so it dodges all red damage removal stuff. So I think there's a lot interesting going on here.
Being able to dodge the crew cost is also pretty meaningful, I think. Like, a lot of times, one of the downsides of the vehicles, obviously, is they reduce the number of blockers you have available, and this just actually can contribute to the number of blockers if you need it to. Which is pretty great.
Yeah, I'm high on this card right now. I really want to test it out and see what it does.
Yeah, I was a little low on it like Danelius when I first read it, but the more I've thought about it, the more I've seen what the support in the set is available, and like the more I've seen just kind of what we're able to do with it. And also Gruul just being able to use this as like a stompy card is kind of cool too. You're not going to play this in every deck, but I think it is quite good. I think one of the things too is that sometimes the green-white decks, you're playing into the token thing, they can run into this spot where you have a bunch of bodies in play, but you don't have a lot of good attacks because you haven't drawn your, Ridgescale Tusker or whatever to open up your lines. And just being able to like tap 3 1/1s to, all right, opponent take 7 is not terrible at all. It's not great necessarily, but it is a thing you can do.
Hop to it. Rabbits get in the earth to rumble, or what's going on?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's go ahead and kick off the gold section here.
Yeah, this is Sky Serpent Seeker green blue for a creature snake, uncommon. It's a 1/1. It has flying and death touch, 2 really nice abilities together, and it has an exhaust ability. Pay 4 mana, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal 2 land cards. Put those lands onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. We got a lot of banger blue-green cards in 2024, and the trend is continuing. What I like about this is that, unlike a lot of the blue-green gold cards that we have been getting, and one that's in this set, it isn't relegated to, a super parasitic synergy card in the set that it's in. This is just a generically strong card. There's kind of 2 different ways in my mind that you're looking to play blue-green in general in my cube. One is kind of the go big mana, do big things in the late game deck, and this is fantastic there because this both is a stop sign on 2, and it also does help you ramp. The fact that 4 mana ability can put 2 color lands into play is very relevant. And then also the other way you're playing blue-green is as this kind of tempo deck, and the fact that you can activate the exhaust ability at instant speed, I think, is very relevant, and it is still a flyer. It's not the best threat as a 2-drop, but I think it's still very usable in that kind of strategy. So I think this card is amazing. I think that it easily slots in as one of the better blue-green cards in my cube.
Yeah, for what it's worth, we discussed this briefly for our mainline JDG cube, which is really, really high praise for an uncommon creature, especially a gold card where the competition is super fierce. We did pass on it there, but this card seems very, very good. Like you said, it's just a really great stat line. Obviously 1/1 flying death touch is not crazy for 2 mana, but it is solid. It's gonna, generally dissuade a lot of your opponents from blocking. I love death touch too as a mechanic. Because one of the things that it does is it lets you skill check people. Because like a lot of times with death touchers, you're supposed to just like ship in and be like, all right, whatever, force you to trade. But sometimes what happens with this is your opponent's going to be like, all right, well, I don't want to lose my creature, so I'm not going to attack you. And I'm going to just attack you for, with my 2 little 1/1s instead of attacking you with my decent creature. And especially if you're the Simic player playing towards that bigger late game, that's exactly what you want, right? Is your opponent having a little bit of hesitation with attacking you so that you can ramp and then play giant things that outclass their board. I love that the exhaust ability is not relegated to sorcery speed. A lot of times these kind of effects are. And so you can do this instant speed, ramp at the end of turn while holding up counter magic. It plays great with Repulsive Mutation as a cheap creature to get onto the board with that card. Yeah, this is just a really, really great card. I think it's in the upper echelon of available cards, and it's got exhaust energy, but it's also just a good value. What if we just like took a totally playable, like a decently playable card and just stapled like you can cast Explosive Vegetation on this, basically?
Remember that needle Drake from Strixhaven? This is the one they told you not to worry about or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. This is him or whatever.
Sorry if you already emphasized this or not, but like this just goes until it reveals 2 lands as well, not basic lands. So like if you hit dual lands, you just get dual lands, which is cool. So sure. That probably makes it a little bit worse at like fixing. You can't just go like fetch up your mountain or whatever, but you will potentially hit some dual lands. So yeah, Flying Death Touch always gets its card. This seems really cool. It's going to be more of a matter of what Simic card to cut, since they keep giving us great Simic cards. So, yeah. What do we got next for this Rakdos dude?
Yeah, so I threw this one on here. This is Gastel Thrill Seeker, red-black for a creature lizard berserker at uncommon. It's a 2/3. It has Stert Yer Engines. It says when this creature enters, it deals 1 damage to target opponent, and you gain 1 life. And then at max speed, this creature has Death Touch and Haste. So I am considering this as kind of part of the larger 7 or 8 card Stert Yer Engines package. There's another gold card that we'll get to in a second. It's also included in there for me. What I like about this card is similar to the other Stert Yer Engine cards. It's a little bit beneath what I'd be hoping to get without the Stert Yer Engines text. I think that it's not that far below, however. A 2 mana for a 2/3 already is not something that we really have seen in black-red very much. We've gotten some 3/2s, but we haven't really seen 2/3s. The only other 2/3 I could find in black or red or black-red is, the Aether card, the black for a 2/3 Death Touch lifelink that I now can't remember what that
Gifted
card is
Etherborn.
There we go. But that's black, and obviously much, very difficult to cast. I'd say harder to cast even than black-red in a black-red deck. Other than that, there's no other 2-mana 2/3s on Arena, and the fact that this comes in and pings, pinging is a very, draining, I should say. It's a very relevant ability. Like I said before, I'm a huge fan of Vampire Spawn. This is 1 mana cheaper than Vampire Spawn, and you're just getting 1 fewer drain. You're still getting the 2/3 body. Mm-hmm. And the fact that, again, this gets you 2 speeds towards your max speed is really relevant for 2 reasons. One, giving this Death Touch pretty quickly, I think, is very relevant, again, on the 2/3 body. I think that matters a lot. And the second thing is, similar to the other gold card we're going to talk about in a bit, this makes this a very interesting target for unearthed effects, for stuff like Call the Death Dweller, where when you bring it back, it's way more likely to actually have both Haste and Death Touch turned on. So I don't think this is good enough if it didn't have the Stert Yer Engines text. I think it would be a little bit below what I'd be hoping for, but I don't think it's that far below. And as a part of a larger Stert Yer Engines module, I think it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think this is a solid card. I mean, I think our Rakdos section is a little more dedicated towards the aggro in-game with the sack plan. And I think you're competing against some pretty powerful cards. I think we're on Blood Tithe Harvester at the moment. Let me just double check. Yeah, we are. And we're on that and Zoya Lava Tongue. And I'm not sure this card's actually better than those cards for our environment. Just because Zoya natively has Death Touch and kind of easy to trigger a lot of the time, and Blood Tithe Harvester is multi-format playable. And so, I mean, I like this card. I don't know if it gets there for us. I think definitely in the more just raw, lower synergy, raw card efficiency environments, I think this is a little bit better. I want to say two things about this card. One is a positive, and the art on this card goes incredibly hard. This art is awesome, and I wish more of the set actually looked like this, where it's just again, we talked about that, the classic Magic art, and this feels to me very classic Magic art. And then the other thing is a bit of a complaint in that at Rare, there's a card in this set called Gastal Thrill Roller. And did we really need to use that template twice? Was that something we needed to do?
Well, I think I like this one more because if you think about this as Gastral instead of Gastal, it's this person's just really into gastronomy, or you could think of it more on the explosive side of things, if you want to put it that way. So I think this is pretty fun, man.
Second poop joke in one episode. What are we doing to ourselves? Yeah, so next up is Veteran Beast Rider, which is 1 green-white for a 3/4 human knight. At the beginning of your instep, untap each creature you control. And then for 2 green-white creatures you control, get +1/+1 until end of turn. And man, this one seems like a banger. Just 3 mana 3/4 is a totally good stat line on its own. Untapping all your creatures is going to have a lot of power and potential synergies. There's going to be spots where you, for example, play this, you convoke out a Triplicate Spirits, you untap everything on the following turn, or you untap Mana Dorks the turn you play it on turn 2 to be able to hold up some sort of, or play Seed of Hope or something like that. It'll have all kinds of little play like that while also being annoying in combat. And then the activated ability is great in the green-white section if the tokens thing is going to come together. I think the green-white deck tends to be more of a good stuff deck with token themes in our cube. And you know what a good stuff deck likes is an overstatted creature that gives all your creatures pseudo-vigilance and can pump your team.
Man, that 4th point of toughness is pulling a lot of weight here.
Yeah, for sure.
It has a pseudo ETB because that untap effect is just always on. So, another nice synergy is just with the links that we already talked about. You can play this on 3, saddle your links, get your planes, then untap both creatures. That really matters a lot. So I think this card is nuts. I think it's cracked. I think it's a really nice signpost for kind of go wide, green, white. And previously the main signpost I had in that slot was Ironroot Warlord, which is a good card. I like that card a lot. But I think this is good enough to supplant it. So yeah, I think this card is awesome. Very excited.
Also, outside art's great. I feel like I've gotten to say that more this episode than in the mainline review. But I like the art on this card a lot.
Fun fact about the art: that's actually not digital art. It's actually just a still from Twilight Break and Dawn.
There we go.
All right. Anyway. So the next card is actually something that I had originally added to the list and then removed because people just in general seem kind of down on it. And then, surprise, it's here again. So whoever added this back to the list, feel free to talk about it.
Yeah, so this is Embalmed Ascendant. It's 1 white-black for a 1/2 with Start Your Engines, when this creature enters, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And max speed, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So I've had a bit of a roller coaster with this card where I saw it and I was like, oh, that's kind of crazy. And then I thought about it for a while and I'm like, this card may be a little understated for what we're getting. I mean, it turns out it's 3/4 worth of stats. It's not understated. And then I was like, how often do we actually get to blood artist people with this? And then I've kind of come back around that I think it's going to be easier in black, white, or the Mardu spectrum to get to max speed than I initially kind of assumed. I think if this card is doing that, I mean, you've got a blood artist that also this counts itself when it dies, and it made a zombie. It works with Vesperal Arc. It works with Core Skyfisher. It works with all the things. I mean, I've kind of come back around where I think this card might be good. Like, might just be great. Even it makes two pieces of cardboard. Adds 2
You're talking
creatures to the board.
Marionette Apprentice levels of power when you actually get to max speed.
Yeah. So I've come back around. I think this card's actually really good. I went really good, then like not so good, and back to really good.
And I think, I went on a similar roller coaster as you. And for me, part of the reason why I'm back up on this card is I do like the idea of a small Stert Yer Engines package. Mm-hmm. But I also agree that I just don't think in general Stert Yer Engines is going to be that hard to get going, or max speed specifically. I don't think it's going to be that hard to get going really on any of these cards. And the fact that this, similar to the last one, works really, really well with Unearth. You play this, you trade off your stuff, eventually you have max speed, and then you unearth this, and then suddenly, wow, like they're in a lot of trouble. So yeah, I think this again, it's slightly beneath, I think, what I would like if I'm not, getting to max speed, but it's not that far beneath what I'm happy to play. So, yeah, I think this is, alongside the other Stert Yer Engines cards, something that I'm interested in testing for sure.
Yeah. That being said, I've complimented the last couple of cards on their art. This is where that ends for a while. This card looks terrible, but whatever, good card.
Well, funny thing about this is it's not actually digital art. It's just a still from Twilight Break and Dawn. Danelius, do you want to go ahead and talk the next one? And please put emphasis on the word haste when you get to it.
Sure. So Rocketeer Boost Buggy. This is red-green for a artifact vehicle uncommon. It's a 3/2 vehicle. It says whenever this vehicle attacks, create a treasure token. And then it has exhaust for 3 mana. This vehicle becomes an artifact creature. Put a +1/+1 counter on it. It gains haste until... No, it doesn't say that. And then it has...
I thought it did.
Yeah, Danelius, where was the haste on the first line? I missed that.
This is the most haste art I've ever seen in my life. The card is called Boost Buggy.
It's Boost Buggy. The art has afterburners, and it's a vehicle attack trigger. Like, it's an attack trigger that makes a treasure. Why is this not haste?
See, the idea is it has to get going, and then you can boost it after it's been going already. So you can't get that creature.
Can't boost in park.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, so what I like about this card is it's a Careening Mine card for 2 instead of 3, and it can crew itself. And I think the crew itself part means that it's not awful, which most vehicles are. Crew 1 is obviously really nice, and it's an artifact generator, and I like artifacts. I like artifacts a lot. I like trinkets, and I was looking for a red-green card that played well in the artifact space. I think this does that. I actually don't think it's amazing or anything. I think it might honestly be worse. Red-green right now, I should take a quick aside to say that red-green has kind of established itself as the big bad in my format. It's winning a lot. It's 3-0ing all the time. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing if I take a card that's just better than this card, like maybe Wickerfolk, and turn it into this, which is probably worse in a vacuum, but has some more synergy potential. So,
I'm glad you said that, because I'm on board with Wickerfolk being like a little bit better on average, but this obviously has upsides.
Yeah. This card. I will say this card goes really hard with Sokin's Smelter. I think I've said that like 5 times this episode. Maybe that's turning into my new Skyfisher or something. But being able to attack, and then like every turn after that, we just we sack our treasure, make a new treasure with our Boost Buggy until our opponent kills it. I will also say, this card I missed, and I think there's a couple of cards in the set that I actually missed this. That exhaust ability does not have becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. And I mentally was plugging in until end of turn on a lot of these cards, and this is better than that.
Yeah, just perma creature from that point.
And also just threat of activation. So on turn 3, a lot of time your opponent's just not going to be able to block this, which is when they really want to block it, because they're making a treasure this turn and then the next turn also. So yeah, I think it's definitely a good card.
I guess it fuels itself, right? Even if we miss our land drop on turn 3, if we have a 1-drop in play, we can crew this, fire it off, and then I can get behind this. I can get behind this.
I think this card's cool. It does compare very, very closely to Wildfire Wickerfolk. I was really on board when I had just internalized and assumed this card had haste somewhere on it, where like the 5-mana mode of just playing it, exhausting it, and attacking right away I thought was really good, but it turns out there's no haste written on the card anywhere, which takes it down like a slight notch compared to the Wildfire Wickerfolk. But the Korean Minecart wasn't anything special when we played it, but bumping that down to 2 mana is like a pretty big deal. In fact, there's a 2-mana 2/2 saddle creature in this set that makes a treasure when it attacks if saddled, and I didn't even want to add it to the list because I knew we were going to talk about this instead, and it just seems so much better.
Yeah, I will say I think Careening Minecart was a little worse than nothing special for us. I think it was kind of closer to terrible than anything else. But I do think when you shave a mana off that and you add some extra layers of upside, it obviously gets a lot better. So I'm hoping this one will actually be kind of nice.
Yeah. So I'm going to continue to put the burden of reading cards on you guys, but I am very excited about this next card.
Sure. I mean, I agree with you. I love this card. And I think we're a bit on an island because I've had a hard time convincing my playgroup that this is worth playing. But
really?
This is Dune Drifter.
This seems great.
I agree. So Dune Drifter is X white black for an artifact vehicle. It's an uncommon 3/3. It says when this vehicle enters, return target artifact, important artifact or creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's funny that it says X, or it has Crew 2 also, which is unfortunate. Crew 2 is meaningfully worse than Crew 1, but it's funny that it says X or less because there's no reason why you would ever overpay. I guess you could overpay and then, there's really no reason why I would say X or less, honestly, but I guess it prevents you from making a mistake when you cast the card. But
sure.
So here's why I like the card. So immediately,
so you can get it up, so that you can recur a 2-drop while also triggering your Up the Beanstalks and your Abs.
Perfect, very smart. Okay, so the comparison that a lot of people immediately went to with this is Hero of the Dunes, and the comparison is not good because Hero of the Dunes, when you pay 5 mana for it, you're getting a 3/2 actual creature, and that actual creature also gives all your other creatures +1/+0. So if you're casting Dune Drifter for 5, it is a worse card than Hero of the Dunes is for 5. You could also compare this card with Sunblessed Healer, which is better on 4 mana than this is on 4 mana because you're getting an actual 3/1 lifelink in play as opposed to a 3/3 vehicle, though that card only hits creatures, or no, that hits non-land. So yes, that's also a better card on 4, no doubt about it. This also, I'd say, compares not so well against stuff like Late for Dinner or, Defossilize, which, basically pick any single card that reanimates, and this card is going to compare worse than those cards for their mana cost. But this has X. It can be all of those cards, and that's the thing to me that makes it very intriguing. And also, it has a hidden mode that I think people aren't seeing enough of in the context
Mishra's
of
Bauble,
which is the 2-mana mode.
0.
You can cast this for 2 and reanimate Mishra's Bauble or your artifact lands that you've milled into your graveyard previously on some, you play your 2-mana Wickerfolk or whatever, you surveil 2, you put an artifact in the yard, and then you play this and you immediately reanimate it. So I think if not for the fact that this can be all of those cards that I previously mentioned, it's not as good as those cards, but those cards are all one thing, and this card is many things. And so
that is true. Those cards are all one thing, which is good.
Yeah. Yes, those cards are all good. That's true.
I'm not nearly as high on this card as you guys. However, I do think like the fact that it's a bad version of a bunch of really good cards is probably still fine, and the fact that it's Mishra Bauble synergy is, I do think that's probably the best thing you could be doing with this card. I'm not super into it, but especially in the Orzhov section that's super crowded. But I wouldn't fault you for playing it. But I'm not cutting Hero of the Doom for this.
All right. Sounds like a conversation that's going to have to happen off air because, man, I like this card. Yeah, I think this is just a super sweet design, even if it is worse on curve than the other comparable cards. Let's not bring up Unearth and act like Unearth isn't just like horribly broken card, though.
Well, also, one quick note on the Unearth comparisons or the other cards, the white cards that reanimate small things or the black cards that reanimate small things. We've never seen a card like this that gets to do that thing while also being a top deck that on 8 mana can reanimate your big thing. That's just, we haven't had that before. So
9 mana, bring back Sheffet Demon, -2 your opponent's board. And this dodges the -2, -2. Oh my god.
Of all the things that you've said, the fact that this could also be like 4 mana, bring back like 6 mana, bring back a 4-drop, that actually does put it into the realm of like interesting, that it scales up so high. Because I've been thinking of this as like X has to be 3 or less, but you're right, you can go up the curve a little bit, and that's probably That's probably
It's
nice.
a way better top deck. It's a way better top deck than Here Are the Dunes is on turn 9. True. And Here Are the Dunes is an incredible top deck on turn 9, but this can put your 5-drop into play. So that has to mean something.
Sure, yeah. This is a hard one. It's mostly just because Orzhov, I think, at Peasant is super stacked. Like, to the point that a lot of the Orzhov cards that we run in our mainline Jank Diver Cube are just whatever the best Orzhov uncommons are from any given set, just because they're so good. So it's a very, very stacked set, or color pair, so it's hard to really find room.
Can I say on this? This can return Hero of the Dunes to play.
Okay.
Just doing the just filtering through Rutstein.
Yeah, I was gonna say we bring back Rutstein, then we pick up like something else. All right, sure. I'm all right. We're cooking. Let's go.
Rutstein's broken. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to this super cool Dimir card.
Yeah. So this is Haunt the Network, and it is 3 blue-black for an uncommon sorcery. Choose target opponent. Create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter creature tokens with flying. Then target player, or the chosen player, loses X life, and you gain X life, or X is the number of artifacts you control. Okay, there is a very fine line between this card being extremely mediocre and this card being the best card in your cube. Because what ends up happening with a lot of the artifact synergies that you run in cube is that if you're really leaning into those, a lot of times you create environments where 75% of the cards are artifacts or artifact adjacent or make artifacts. And once you're doing that, and this card is like, okay, I'm going to play this and I'm going to drain you for, I don't know, 6 life or something, 8 life. You're getting a little silly. Like, I like this card, but then I think about it in the context of, for example, of our Neo Cube, which is an environment like that, where a huge percentage of the environment is artifacts. And there's a Grixis 4-color Anvil artifact mid-range deck that's very, very good in that cube. And like, you play this card and it's just going to hit your opponent for whatever their life total is. It's probably going to hit them for, right? You're just going to dome them for X is 8 or not X, but like you're going to hit them for 8, right? And you're going to gain 8 life and the game is just going to be over. So I think there's a very, very fine line on this card between like kind of underperforms and best card in your cube.
Yeah, so for me, I think 20% or so of my cube is either an artifact or creates an artifact that includes artifact lands. And I'm very comfortable with that number, making this, for me, the most excited card in the set. I'm not saying it's the best card in the set. I do think that's the Lynx, but I think this is the most exciting card in the set. One of the things that I love the most about it is that it gives me a reason to play artifacts, specifically colorless artifacts like Prophetic Prism, Sphere, Bauble, all these things that previously I've had in my cube. More because I feel like you need to have some number of colorless cards in your cube just to facilitate drafting. Not because I think they're particularly strong. They're all very just synergy cards through and through. This, I think, makes all of those a lot better plays in a kind of 3-color artifact space, maybe even a 4-color artifact space where you're using artifacts that tap for mana and help you splash things, and then this is just your finisher. Maybe you're playing a creature that can return instants or sorcery from your yard, and your whole game plan is just to stall, try to get to a point where you can play Haunt, return it, play it again, win the game. Yeah, so one of the other things I like about it, I think in Aetherdrift specifically, it's not going to play that way. I think in Aetherdrift, it's going to be much more of a tempo card, where you're just trying to curve out artifact into Haunt and end the game quickly, because ultimately this is not putting much power and toughness into play. It's only putting the 2/1/1s in play. So if you're really behind, I don't think this is actually going to stabilize you as well as you might think it does. And yeah, if it's hitting for 8 or whatever, then it's going to make it hard for your opponent to attack because they're going to be a low life total. But I think generally speaking, it's playable in 2 spots. One, a very tempo-oriented blue-black artifact deck, which I think can exist in my environment. And then it also gets to be this kind of single finisher in a more splashy 3, 4, 5 color artifact deck, where this is like your whole game plan. And I think that's really, really cool, and creates a kind of a whole new archetype in my environment. That's really exciting.
Yeah. So there's a couple of cards that I think are really interesting with this card. Firstly, obviously, curving into Whirler Rogue is really good because you just like curve that, then you play your this, and now you got 4 power worth of flyers, and you dome them for 4. It's a really easy curve to hit. There's a number of cards that produce like multiple cards, like Detective Satchel or Onicult Anvil, especially. And then what was the other one? I was just looking and saw it. Oh yeah. Cards like Completed Huntmaster are able to convert cards into artifacts, along with like OC see a Stick Twister just being an artifact. I do think there's a lot of play to this, to the point that like it might be just fine in our current environment, especially as it's getting more artifact centric. I think it's a really nifty card, and it, if you're ever able to pick it up, flash it back, whatever, I think it starts getting some real power behind it too.
Yeah, our the Draft Sim limited review went up last week that I had to edit for 3 hours straight, but the writer kept comparing this to Grey Merchant of Asphodel, which like was kind of an apt comparison in my mind, as like a 5-mana baseline drain 2, but scales up the more work you put into it. This card seems like you said, if I put this in the Affinity Cube, which I already did, like this just seems unreasonable there. It's just going to Zenith Flare your opponent out of the game while adding bodies to the board. So there is a fine line between like probably have to put in too much work to don't have to put in much work at all, and this card is insane. But I do kind of like where it's positioned in just kind of like normal streamlined Peasant Cubes that aren't doing like an explicit artifact thing and just have incidental artifacts. And then obviously if you're supporting artifacts, like, yeah, this card can be absolutely bonkers with the right build.
Notably, this commits a crime for Bandit's Hall, so you can use Bandit's Hall to curve into this and then put a counter on it. Mm-hmm.
You just have your Grim Bauble sitting in play, and it's okay, I'll get an extra point of damage off that. So yeah, card's very, very cool. We do have another artifact payoff here. This one's a lot more streamlined. This is Voyage Home for 5 white blue. It is an uncommon sorcery with affinity for artifacts, so it can get down to just white blue potentially. And the effect is you draw 3 cards and gain 3 life. Wanted to mention this as an archetypal payoff for blue-white artifacts because, like Teld mentioned, after the Foundations or Pioneer Masters or whatever the last review we did was, we have shifted our blue-white section to Artifact Matters, and I wouldn't say we were necessarily scrapping for like signpost cards, but if we wanted just a very explicit signpost card to tell drafters like blue-white is doing artifacts, this is about as clear cut as it gets. While also I think just being kind of strong, like it's not trivial to get 5 artifacts in play, but you'll often have 2 to 3, and like if you put in the work during the draft, you can get up to 5 and make this cost 2, 3, 4 mana. Anything above 4, and I'm like not really that interested, because then you're just talking about Harmonize at that point. But if you can get this down to 2 or 3 mana, I think it's quite good and a nice signpost card. Though I don't think it's like a must play for blue-white sections.
Yeah, I like the next card much better. I think the Voyage Home is fine, but I'm really excited by Guidelight Pathmaker. It's 4 white-blue for a 6/5 artifact vehicle with Vigilance and Crew 2. And when it enters, you may search your library for an artifact card and reveal it and put it onto the battlefield if its mana value is 2 or less. Otherwise, put it into your hand and shuffle. So I kind of feel like this card's great. I mean, I know 6 mana, no buyout. Like, I have to preface that. But this spots you at 2-drop if you're behind, right? So you can go get your Portable Hole, your Citizen's Crowbar. You can go get, whatever defensive 2-drop if you have Artifact or Sundial to add to your board. And then if you're in a parity situation, being able to tutor for something like Master's Guide Mural or, one of these other more expensive but powerful artifact cards, if you even go get something like a Mirror Shell Crab to give you a giant thing to cast, an Essence Reliquary or something. I'm not sure if you need a more dedicated artifact environment for this card, but I kind of like it, and I kind of like the flexibility. I'm huge on tutors. I love when they are able to add to the board as well. So I'm really into this card, even though I acknowledge all the things that we've said about expensive card with no buyout.
This is the type of thing that makes me like the Diversion unit a little bit more, right? Because it's a 2-drop creature that you can go get that can also crew this, so you can block with it the turn it comes down. Because the worst case scenario is you just fetch up something dorky and you can't crew this Guidelight Pathmaker, you just get run over, right? But if you can fetch anything that can either crew it or interact with the board, it's probably fine. I don't know where I'm at on it, because it is just a giant vehicle. Like, if it wasn't a vehicle and it was just a 6/5 for 6, I'd probably be like, yeah, that's pretty strong. But again, we mentioned this in the mainline cube. It's kind of been a running theme in the background. But like, for any given vehicle, like however good you think it is, like you just have to knock your expectation down just like a notch. They always play marginally worse than they read, even if you account for them being a vehicle. So I'm not sure where I'm at, but it is, again, blue-white artifacts. It is like a perfect signpost card for what we're doing right now.
Real quick on the vehicle front, to just develop that thought a little bit more, one of the reasons why vehicles in general are so bad is because they open up play opportunities for your opponent. Because they say, hey, I need a certain board state for this to be maximized, and you get to interact with that board state. You can trade off your creatures, you can use your removal spell on my creatures, and suddenly that makes my other cards worse. And I really dislike cards that kind of guide your opponent towards good plays, in a way, if you will. But specifically for these two cards, my issue with Pathmaker is it's just 6 mana, and 6 mana is so much. It's so much. When you're not talking about green, especially, and you're talking about a gold card that isn't green, so you're having a hard time, ramping into this effect. Like 6 mana is just so much. I need an incredibly powerful effect, and draw an artifact to me is not a very powerful effect, even if you're getting a good artifact. And putting a 2 mana thing in play, that to me is by far the more powerful ability on this. But even if you just see this as 6 mana, 6/5 vigilance per 2 that puts a relatively strong 2-drop into play, I don't know that's good enough, just because I value the vehicle so little. So I see there is power there, but 6 mana, if this cost 5 and was like a 5/4, I'd be way more into it. But 6 is just so much. In terms of Voyage Home, I like it. I like it less than Haunt the Network, because I see it as it's less of a win con. Like Haunt the Network, you can build a deck around in my mind, and this gets to be the way you win the game. Whereas Voyage Home, you can't really cast Voyage Home when you're really behind. It's not stabilizing you. Gain 3 life is nice, but it's not really stabilizing you. Haunt the Network in my mind is doing way more to actually stabilize you. This is a card you cast when you're already in a pretty reasonable position, or you're least even, and then it's vaulting you ahead. It's also not an artifact itself, which Haunt the Network is. It makes artifacts itself, whereas Voyage Home doesn't. So I view both of these white blue cards as cards you can play if you're trying to support a blue-white artifact theme. I am myself, and I'm probably going to end up playing one or the other, but I don't think either of them are all that impressive.
It's just Treasure Cruise. Just call it what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Just Treasure Cruise. Yep. Agreed.
All right. Last non-land card here looks like a Teld edition.
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw this one out there. It's Broadside Barrage. It's 1 blue-red for an instant, deal 5 to target creature or planeswalker, and then you draw 1, discard 1. Not particularly exciting or interesting, but it does 2 things that are pretty good. It's like a big version of Slick Sequence in a way. I know that card can put you up a card, but oftentimes you're combining it with another burn spell to kill a creature anyways. Nothing crazy about this, but it does support the draw 2 thing. It supports the discard thing. It kills a big creature reliably. So just another option in the tool belt of blue-red cards, depending on what you're doing with it.
Yeah, cool little glue card.
Especially if you're supporting draw 2, I think this becomes an interesting option.
We've got a couple lands to round things out with here. Night Market, I think, is just a really nice addition to the card pool. This one is common. When it enters, you choose a color. It enters the battlefield tapped. It taps for 1 mana of the chosen color. We've seen that quite a bit in retail limited sets. But they tacked on Cyclone 3, which I mentioned this as a strict upgrade to something like the Mesa, the Desert, or whatever. Obviously, if you care about deserts, you would rather have the Desert card type there, but as far as things like Shimmergriff, there's the Snow one, but there's enough of these generic ones that don't really do anything besides just letting you tap for any mana of color, and add in Cyclone 3 is a nice addition to those. I would say Cyclone 3 is approaching the territory where you don't actually do it that often, but you will take it rather than not have it at all. The card that we're probably going to play this over is Edgewall Inn, which Edgewall Inn is nice because every now and then you get to spike a adventure back to your hand, but it can do that. It just doesn't do it very often. I imagine you're going to get a little bit more value off of cycling a land than doing the really specific adventure thing too often. But yeah, I mean, this is just a nice upgrade to this sort of effect that we get pretty much every other set now.
I think there's also one other type of card that you got to compare this with is just your generic Terramorphic Expanse.
Evolving Wilds, yeah.
Which those cards aren't as good as this, I would say, in a vacuum, but when you start adding landfall creatures into the mix, they do gain some synergy potential there. So it can be, but there's more options. Yeah, options is good.
With these sorts of multi-purpose mana fixers, you have some flexibility depending on what's going. Honestly, if you cared about just discard synergy, you might want Ash Barrens. If you cared about sacrifice synergy or landfall, you will take Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic. Or I guess Escape Tunnel is technically the one that we go with now. But yeah, if you just generically care about mana fixing and you want an extra little bit of value, the Cyclone on Night Market's a nice thing to have.
Yeah, and we saw it with Triumphs when we ran them in the mainline and other various cube environments. You just cycle them some percentage of the time when you draw them late game. So
yeah. The landscapes too. I mean, we have the landscapes, right? You don't actually see those get cycled that often, but it is nice that you can do it. Last land, Start Your Engines land. Danielius, you added this one. You want to go ahead and close this off?
Amonkhet Raceway. This is an uncommon land with Start Your Engines. It taps for colorless, and it has max speed. Tap, target creature gains haste until end of turn. I do like this more than the other Start Your Engines land, which at max speed gives you like 3 tap to discard a card and draw a card, and I have a hard time imagining spending 4 mana, essentially, which is what that is to activate that effect ever. But so I think there's 2 reasons why I'm interested in this. One is, again, it's kind of another card in a larger Start Your Engines module that I'm looking to test. And I do think that tap, give haste to a creature is an incredibly powerful ability. And if you're close to monocolored in like a mono red or a mono white-ish aggressive deck, I think that this is a reasonable card to have as your 16th land or whatever, when all the rest of your lands are plains, or most of the rest of your lands are plains or mountains. I do think that tap haste is very strong. So that being said, I don't think it's a must play or anything. I'm much more likely to be interested in it in a larger Start Your Engines package, which I'm hoping to test.
Okay, is Amonkhet Raceway into Gingerbrute just the best start you can have in Peasant Cube?
Oh, yes, I love it. That's exactly what I was thinking, actually, when I was thinking about this card.
I think the awkward thing about this card is, like you mentioned, it kind of wants to go into monocolored aggressive decks, and then like when you start looking at what those decks are doing, Aemir and Razorkin Hordecaller already have haste. I guess giving like an Area Auxiliary, a Shepherd of the Cloud, something like that, haste is fine. Oliphant getting haste is fine. But what I really want to do with this, I want to use it to give Sifterworm haste. And that takes so much mana.
Start Your Engines, Sifterworm. Yeah, so a sequencing thing here. It reads awkward to have Start Your Engines attached to these colorless lands, but like turn 1's not actually the ideal time to play these, right? It's you want to use your colored mana on turn 1 to get your 1-drop down, and then play something like this on turn 2, hit your opponent with the 1-drop you played, and go up to 2 speed immediately, right? You don't necessarily need the 1-drop. Like, you don't need Start Your Engines on turn 1. You just need to be able to enable it on turn 2, maybe turn 3 at the latest. So, like, this does not have to be your first land of the game. A lot of people, I think, are misevaluating some of the, like, 1-drops in this set that have Start Your Engines. Like, especially the Gas Guzzler, it's a rare. But, like, that card is just so bad because you could just play a different creature that is more likely to get through in combat, and then play a Start Your Engines card on turn 2 and hit with your evasive creature, and like almost guarantee going up to 2 speed right away, as opposed to relying on a really bad 1-drop, like the Nestin Robot or whatever, is not guaranteed to get in on turn 2. Whereas like a Menace creature on turn 1 will get in on turn 2, and you just need the Amonkhet Raceway on turn 2 or some other Start Your Engines cards on turn 2 to like piggyback off of the evasive 1-drop.
I don't see this as the key thing about this in like a mono red deck, for instance. It's not that you're looking to get your 5-drop haste that already likely has haste, because it's a 5-drop in cube in red that needs to have haste anyways. It's also because this effectively adds a mana to those cards, because you have to tap this card to do it. It's nice that you can turn your 2-drops and your 3-drops that don't naturally have haste, that otherwise would be nearly dead draws off the top on turn 6, turn 7, where you're really looking to end the game. This turns those into actual game-winning
Triggers Valiant.
I don't know why. Triggers Heartfire Hero every turn. I don't know why in my mind that I shortcutted this to the Arena of Glory text, but yeah, I definitely did that without thinking about it. And this is not that. This is not.
No, it does tax your creature, so to speak. Final note here. This is Basri and Zahur in the art, right? Like they won the Grand Prix or whatever. They're just. Their vehicle is just a bunch of rhinoceroses. How did they win? How did they win this?
Also, who cares about Basri? Like, is this setting up some sort of bigger plot line that is going to happen like several years from now, because there's a million universes beyond sets in between
10 years of Basri, 10 more years Basri and Zahur. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how the rhinos won this race, but whatever.
I have to assume, and maybe this is a bold assumption, but I have to assume if we're making Zahur and Basri win this thing to get the Aether Spark or whatever instead of Nissa, that there's a specific reason for that. That again, I doubt we'll find out about it this year, because we're going to Tarkir and then to several
bitches love Basri.
I think the key idea is that Planeswalkers suck now, and now the key selling point is legendary creatures, and that's why they had Basri. Because they can't have a Planeswalker win, because they can't sell Planeswalkers.
Ironically, Basri also a terrible commander, because you can't cycle it from the command zone.
Ooh, sorry, cat decks. All right, well, that wraps things up. let's go ahead and, I mean, if you have any big picture thoughts, I think one of the kind of like through lines here is Stert Yer Engines, and I guess another big through line being kind of artifacts. Like notably, like you mentioned, we talked about like 5 vehicles, but they're not exactly headliners of the set, which you imagine they would be. So the headliners actually end up being like Stert Yer Engines and some of the artifact payoffs here, maybe cycling to some degree. But do you guys have any like big picture thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, I got a hot take for you. They've saved all of the actual good vehicles for Edges of Eternity Limited.
Or for Alchemy, because we're getting an Alchemy set.
No. We're going to get spaceships. And they're going to be great.
My summary thought is that we were playing my cube yesterday, and someone commented that a couple of vehicles that they saw in packs, specifically the Marauding Dreadship and the Enchanted Carriage, they were like, are these 2 vehicles just better than every vehicle that we got in Aetherdrift, the vehicle set? And yeah, basically I would say they pretty much are. I don't understand. I really don't get the idea of making this vehicle set and giving us so few vehicles that seem like they matter at all. It's truly bizarre to me. But I don't design sets, and they do, so I'm sure they have their reasons. But weird decision.
Are you excited about the prospects of Stert Yer Engines, or do you think it's more of like a flash in the pan type thing? Because we're never going to see the mechanic again, right?
I seriously doubt that the cards that say Stert Yer Engines on them will be forever cards for me. Let's put it that way. But I'm really enjoying trying to change up my cube all the time because it's getting drafted all the time, and I think it will be a fun module to bring in and out, and it won't feel, the cards won't feel bad or out of place when I do so. So nice side grades, and I think if this set is a harbinger of things to come, then I think it's going to be more and more like this, where we're getting lots of side grades, lots of cards you can add, and it's going to kind of be up to the designer to decide how they want to shape their cubes, and I think that's overall a good thing. That'll be fun to experience. I prefer that to here's 5 cards that you just have to add, and there's no real thought behind it.
Yeah, I'm assuming we're going to be back to there's 5 cards we have to add here shortly. I think this is based on last year at least. More likely here we're going to start the year off with some lower power chill stuff, and then we're going to, by the time we get to later in the year, especially with these Universes Beyond sets, because they want them to be flashy to sell packs, I expect the power level will get cranked right back up.
Final Fantasy is going to have a bunch of vehicles, isn't it?
Final Fantasy is guaranteed to have a bunch of... It's going to be... There's no way that set just isn't full of bangers, right?
I don't know. What did we get? I mean, for forever cards, what did we get? Like the Lynx and the Grimbauble are probably the 2 biggest ones?
Maybe the blue-green snake bird thing.
It's just hard. I think it's hard to call gold cards forever cards because that's where they put a lot of juice. I really think it's mostly Bobble and Lynx, yeah.
I'd say Lynx is definitely the one that I think is the most like, this is like, it's kind of hard to see them pushing past this anytime soon.
Probably Molt Tender too. Actually, Dredger's Insight's probably up there with forever cards, at least until they continue to creep up on the 2 mana cantrip green spell, which they've been doing gradually for the last year or so.
I also think Galvanic Blast is another card that's unlikely to get any worse, and if anything, will just get better over time, like I mentioned. I think it's the kind of card that is about the limit of what you can put on a 1 mana card, because like if you have it activated, it is better Lightning Bolt, and that is something that they have strictly refused to even give us Lightning Bolt, let alone better Lightning Bolt.
Yeah. Fun fact about the art on Galvanic Blast. Sorry. Okay, I'm not going to do the bit again. That should wrap us up, though. Again, I want to apologize to the listener 3 hours later, because I'm sure you're still here, about the kind of gravelly, grating voice that I've been using for the past 3 hours. Hopefully it's not like... I would have hoped Danelius or Teld would have stopped me at some point if it was like really bad and told me not to continue, but they never did, so...
Yeah, now you get to go hop off of air with me and go talk about swaps for another hour.
I'll have to give it a pause on that. I'm also debating going to a pre-release tonight, but I'm like, should I really be talking more? Probably not, but yeah, that's going to go ahead and do it. A lot of really cool stuff here. 37 pages of cards to talk about from the Peasant Cube. Very few of which are vehicles, which is both concerning and probably a good thing for the sake of our cube. But plenty of tough stuff to talk about. A lot of cool new cards coming in. As always, to the listener, come give us your opinion on the cards if you feel like we're underrating, or if Danelius specifically is overrating something. Come let us know. We would love to hear about it. You can do that in the Jank Diver Gaming Discord, which is linked somewhere wherever you're listening to this. And you can find Danelius as well in the Limited Level Ups Discord, where he's doing some moderating stuff and convincing people that Blue-Black Artifacts is playable in Cube. I am going to skip the usual spiel to give my voice a rest and just say find us on socials. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. It helps a lot. I think we're like 3 people away from 300 subscribers, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but that's a big deal for me. So, give me the endorphins. Hit the subscribe button. That's going to go and do it. Danelius, thanks as always for joining and giving us your insight on the peasant environment in general. You've got a lot of passionate views about it. And Teld, thanks for being here as well. And we will catch everybody next time for some more high-level cube-related content. Oh, hey there. You're still here, huh? No, it's fine. I wasn't really expecting anyone to make it to the end. The audio issues and that flatline noise for the last few hours and everything. I figured everybody probably stopped halfway, but I didn't really have anything planned for the farewell segment. Normally I'd have like a small bit or something prepared, but I guess you're here, so I can probably do a little improv. Let's see. What can I do on the fly here? How do you feel about a little bit of tap dancing? Yeah. Would you like that? Would you like to see some tap dancing? All right. Hold tight for just a second. Let me get up and all right. Let me get in position. Do a little stretch and check this out. Ta 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 ta, cha 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 cha, da 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 da, ba ba da ba. Man, how was that? Oh, nothing at all. Oh, geez. Okay. Shoot. What else? Oh, how about a joke? Hey, you into jokes? How about a joke? Yeah, we could do a joke. Sure. Okay. I got one. What do you call a bunch of cows wanking it in a field? Beef stroking off. Get it? It's like beef stroganoff, but it's stroking. Oh man, tough crowd. Jeez, I'm sweating over here. What? Come on, there's got to be some. Oh, are you into the arts? Are you into the arts at all? Fine literature. Okay, how about a dramatic reading of the opening to Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales? All right, you ready for this? When the uproar with his shoulder sota, the drute march had pierced to the rota, and bothered every vein in switch the core, of which virtue engendered is the floor. Really? No reaction? Nothing at all? That was literally a perfect reading of Canterbury Tales in Old English. You know what, man? Fuck you, man. I try so hard to be entertaining. I took all those goddamn stand-up improv lessons back in college, and this is the thanks I get. Look, I don't know what you want from me. Guess I'll just stick to magic card evaluations, which I bet I'm no good at that either, am I? I mean, seriously, Urgent Necropsy, Kona, Rescue Beastie. Seriously, Tim, those are the cards you want to discuss on the review episode. God, I'm such a failure. This is why I script out these outros. Man, fuck you. You could have just laughed at beef stroking off and everything would have been fine. And look at us padding out runtime for the YouTube video. Man, I quit, man. I fucking quit. Whatever. I'll see y'all next episode, and hopefully I won't sound like a horse with a possum stuck in its throat.